Tonight you are about to step into a forgotten world long before civilization where every night could be your last. Above you the stars burn with unusual clarity because no city has taught the darkness how to glow tonight. Somewhere beyond the grass, something heavy moves through brush and dry branches crack beneath unseen feet. There are no walls, roads lamps or reassuring signs pointing toward a safe place before morning. Yet humans are already here, though the figures below are certainly not your humans. The figures crossing this ancient landscape belong to a species older and more enduring than most people realize at first glance. Homo erectus may have survived for well over 1 million years while adapting to radically different environments. They traveled extraordinary distances and persisted through climatic changes that erased countless animals and human relatives. So what does success mean? Before we step deeper into the darkness of tonight's story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more calming historical journeys. As you settle into your pillow, tell me in the comments your location and the local time there right now. Now dim the lights and imagine the floor beneath you becoming dry, African earth warmed by a long afternoon sun. Dust hangs lightly in the air, carrying the singed smell of crushed grass, warm soil and nearby animals in the evening breeze. Insects hum close to your ankles while distant birds call from scattered trees across the open country. The breeze feels dry against your skin. You are standing nearly 2 million years before your own familiar world. Nothing around you knows the name Homo Sapiens because your species has not appeared yet. Modern humans remain separated from this moment by countless generations, migrations, extinctions, and evolutionary accidents. Yet the ground beneath you already carries footprints made by members of the human family. Ahead, a small group moves steadily across the grass toward a low ridge. They walk upright on long legs, balancing with a stride more human-like than many earlier hominins possessed across uneven ground. These are humans of another kind, and their name will become Homo erectus. The name Homo erectus means upright human, although earlier ancestors had already been walking on 2 legs for countless generations. The label arose when early researchers imagined the human family tree as much tidier than it appears today. Prehistory with gentle stubbornness refused to cooperate. Homo erectus appeared roughly 2 million years ago, although researchers debate exactly where the species begins. Some African fossils are called Homo ergaster, while many paleoanthropologists today include them within a broader Homo erectus grouping. Ancient bones rarely arrive with labels, family trees, or helpful introductions from the past. This uncertainty matters because species names are human categories imposed upon populations changing across enormous spans of time and continents. Researchers still argue whether every fossil called Homo erectus truly belongs within one highly variable species across every region. Even with those disagreements, one remarkable fact remains difficult to ignore tonight. Human populations commonly associated with Homo erectus survived for an astonishing stretch of prehistoric time. Depending on classification, their story may extend from nearly 2 million years ago until surprisingly late in the Pleistocene. That span is several times longer than the entire known existence of Homo sapiens so far. The comparison invites humility because modern humans often call themselves history's most successful human species. Homo sapiens, however, has existed for only around 300,000 years. Homo erectus endured much longer despite possessing none of the technological advantages that now surround you. Longevity does not automatically mean superiority because evolution does not award trophies for simply staying around. Still, persistence matters when a species survives repeated climatic swings and colonizes unfamiliar regions. You continue walking beside the ancient group as afternoon light softens around you. Grassland gives way to scattered woodland, while a river probably lies beyond the ridge ahead. Perhaps they already know this route from earlier journeys across the same seasonal landscape. Survival often depends upon memory, especially when dry seasons return and familiar resources become difficult to find once again. Edible roots appear in particular soils, while useful stone may occur only along certain exposed slopes. A younger individual stays close beside an older member of the group. Another carries something difficult to identify, perhaps food stone or a useful piece of wood. Fossils cannot reveal exactly what these travelers said, whether they spoke or how complex their gestures became among themselves. A warning sound disappears instantly, and a lesson beside a river may leave almost nothing behind. Archaeologists recover stone tools, animal bones, sediments, footprints, and occasional traces that may indicate controlled fire. They rarely recover the ordinary behaviors that make a community function from one morning to another. Their technology can look simple beside objects made by much later humans, yet simplicity may conceal competence. Some early populations used straightforward stone technologies while later groups became associated with Acheulean hand axes. Producing a balanced hand axe can involve planning controlled force and a practical understanding of stone fracture. Similar forms appeared across huge spans of time, creating one of humanity's longest-lasting tool traditions. Scholars still debate why the shape endured so consistently across so many generations and places. It may have been practical, although symmetry could also reflect learned preference, skill display, or social tradition within the group. Nobody left an instruction manual. The deeper lesson is wonderfully undramatic because Homo erectus probably survived through several modest advantages working together. Efficient walking, flexible diets, useful tools, social learning, mobility and environmental tolerance all may have contributed. Evening settles softly over the grass as brown and gold slowly fade toward grey. The scent of warm soil weakens while cooler air moves through the valley. Somewhere nearby, an animal gives a brief warning call above the steady whisper of insects. Beneath such an enormous sky, the travellers seem almost impossibly vulnerable to your modern eyes. They possess no metal weapons, hospitals, written maps, or reliable forecasts, yet their descendants keep surviving. That may be the first great surprise in the story of Homo erectus. They were not an evolutionary rehearsal waiting patiently for modern humans to appear. Across immense time, children learned roots, tools, foods and habits from adults shaped by earlier generations. Their traditions may have persisted longer than entire civilizations known to written history. You remain still as darkness deepens. The travellers become silhouettes moving toward water shelter or perhaps a familiar resting place. What should count most when we decide which human species was truly the most successful? If success means technology, Homo sapiens has an obvious advantage over every earlier species. If success means transforming the planet, we have certainly done that with alarming enthusiasm. But if success means endurance and adaptability through vast change, the answer becomes less comfortable. Homo erectus may deserve another look. Before you understand why these humans lasted so long, you must first meet them properly. They were not crude shadows beneath modern humanity, but people exquisitely shaped for worlds long before yours. Section 2. The figures ahead continue moving through the fading light, and you begin noticing how familiar their bodies appear. Not identical to yours, certainly, but far removed from the image of a hunched creature struggling awkwardly across prehistoric ground. Their posture is upright, their stride balanced, and their limbs suggest a body increasingly suited to covering long distances. When one individual turns toward the others, the face still carries heavy brows and a low forehead, yet the overall silhouette feels unmistakably human. This is where Homo erectus becomes difficult to dismiss as merely another transitional species. You follow the group toward a shallow rise where the land opens beneath a wide evening sky. Dry grass brushes against your legs, and the air smells faintly of dust, animal hide, and damp earth from somewhere downhill. Their footsteps make soft, irregular sounds against gravel and hardened soil. One adult pauses briefly and scans the horizon. You do the same. The body standing beside you represents a major change in the human evolutionary storyline. Earlier hominins had already walked upright, but Homo erectus carried a combination of proportions that made sustained terrestrial movement increasingly efficient. Longer legs, shorter arms, and a more human-like body plan gave these populations new possibilities across open environments. Their exact height varied between individuals and populations just as human bodies vary today. Some fossils suggest surprisingly tall individuals while others were much smaller. This variation reminds you that Homo erectus existed across enormous distances and extraordinary stretches of time. There was never one single Homo erectus body. Instead, you are looking at populations changing gradually under different environmental pressures while still sharing important anatomical patterns. Their bones tell a story of walking endurance, physical stress, growth, injury, and survival. Fossil skeletons remain incomplete, though. Several discoveries provide unusually detailed glimpses into their lives. One of the best-known examples comes from East Africa. A remarkably complete adolescent skeleton discovered near Lake Turkana became famous as the Turkana boy, often assigned into Homo erectus or Homo ergaster. His remains revealed long limbs and body proportions strikingly adapted to life on the ground. He lived more than 1 million years ago in a landscape very different from the one surrounding your bedroom tonight. You imagine him walking across open country under fierce sunlight. His footsteps disappear behind him almost immediately. The heat presses against your shoulders now as the imagined landscape shifts beneath the story. Even near evening, stored warmth rises from the ground, and sweat would matter greatly in such conditions. Human bodies possess an unusually effective system of cooling through sweating compared with many mammals covered more heavily in fur. Exactly when major reductions in body hair occurred, remains uncertain because hair does not fossilize conveniently for curious researchers. Genetic and anatomical evidence suggests important changes occurred deep within human evolution. Scholars continue debating how closely these changes were connected with the endurance walking, running, heat regulation parasites, or several pressures working together. The result, however, would eventually become powerful. Imagine crossing exposed terrain while the sun sits high above the horizon. A quadrupedal predator may be faster during a short burst, yet sustained movement under heat creates different demands. Upright posture reduces the amount of body surface directly facing overhead sunlight, while sweating helps release heat. Homo erectus appears well suited to this increasingly mobile existence. Some researchers have even connected these anatomical traits with endurance running and persistence hunting. The idea suggests hunters could have pursued animals until overheating exhausted the prey. It is an elegant hypothesis and certainly memorable, though direct evidence for habitual persistence hunting among Homo erectus remains limited. Prehistory enjoys keeping its best scenes off camera. Whether or not long-distance running formed an important hunting strategy, efficient mobility itself provided enormous advantages. Water sources shift herds, migrate plants ripen seasonally, and drought may force communities away from familiar ground. A body capable of traveling farther can reach possibilities unavailable to a population tied closely to one narrow habitat. You'll begin walking again beside the group. Their pace is steady rather than hurried. A child moves between adults, shortening steps to remain close while another individual carries a roughly shaped stone. Perhaps the object will become a cutting tool later, or perhaps it has already served that purpose several times. Their brains were larger than those of earlier members of Homo, though generally smaller than modern human averages. Brain size also increased considerably during the long existence of Homo erectus, yet brain volume alone cannot explain why these people survived so effectively across such different environments. Large brains are cognitive organs. They demand energy, extended development, and reliable access to nutrition. Bigger does not automatically mean better, especially when survival depends upon balancing many biological costs. Homo erectus seems to have occupied a remarkably successful middle ground between anatomical changes, behavioral flexibility, and energetic demands. Their skulls carried features you would immediately notice at close range. Heavy brow ridges projected above the eyes while the cranial vault remained long and low. The bones of the skull could be thick, and the back of the head often displayed distinctive structural features. Their jaws lacked the prominent chin characteristic of modern Homo sapiens. You would never mistake the face completely for your own. Still, familiarity keeps returning. The eyes track movement. Hands grip tools, feet follow known ground, young individuals remain close to adults, and group members probably depended upon one another in ways fossilized bone can only partly reveal. That last point matters more than it first appears. One strange and quietly moving fossil discovery involves individuals who survived serious physical problems. At Dmanisi in present-day Georgia, one elderly hominin had lost most teeth long before death, yet the jawbone showed substantial healing. Researchers have wondered how such an individual survived without normal chewing ability. Perhaps softer foods were available naturally. Perhaps food was processed. Perhaps companions helped. No fossil can tell you exactly what happened, and interpretations remain cautious. Still, survival after severe tooth loss raises fascinating questions about social tolerance and food sharing among early humans. You can almost picture the evening meal. Something fibrous is pulled apart by hand, while softer material passes from one person toward another. There is no grand declaration of compassion, only an ordinary act repeated because somebody in the group still matters. Archaeology rarely preserves kindness directly, which makes even its possibility strangely powerful. The air cools further as the group reaches lower ground. You hear insects gathering near water and frogs beginning somewhere within reeds. Damp soil replaces dust beneath your feet, producing a heavier smell mixed with vegetation and animal tracks. The travelers slow down, perhaps recognizing signs invisible to you. Knowledge of landscape may have been among their greatest tools. Which plants ripen after rain? Where does stone fracture cleanly? Which animals become dangerous at dusk? How far away is the next reliable spring? None of these questions requires modern technology, yet every correct answer increases the odds of seeing another sunrise. Information passed socially can transform an ordinary landscape into a remembered map of opportunities and risks. Researchers continue debating how sophisticated communication may have become in Homo erectus. Their anatomy and neurological capacities offer clues, but spoken language leaves no fossil record. Some scholars imagine relatively complex vocal communication, while others prefer more cautious models combining gesture calls, learned routines, and perhaps increasingly structured speech. You cannot hear their conversations clearly. That silence is permanent, but you can observe what they achieved without needing to reconstruct every word. Homo erectus populations expanded far beyond their earliest African environments, entered new ecological zones, maintained tool traditions, and persisted through repeated climatic instability. They survived because no single adaptation carried them. A stronger stride without memory would fail. Tools without cooperation would fail. Intelligence without food would fail. What emerges instead is a flexible package of ordinary abilities working together over immense stretches of time. Their success probably came not from one dramatic breakthrough, but from thousands of practical adjustments repeated across countless generations. Night now settles over the travelers you have been following. Their bodies fade into the dim landscape, though the rhythm of footsteps remains for several moments longer. You are beginning to understand why Homo erectus cannot be reduced to a primitive figure standing somewhere behind modern humanity. To understand how such a durable human form emerged, however, you must travel backward again. Back toward Africa. Back toward unstable landscapes where climate, food competition and movement began, reshaping the possibilities of being human. Section 3. The path beneath your feet leads backward through time until even the familiar outline of Homo erectus begins to blur. Africa stretches around you beneath a pale morning sky, enormous, varied and restless. The air carries the smell of dry grass, damp earth near distant water, and smoke from no human settlement you would recognize. Wind slides across your skin, lifting fine dust and bending seed heads in long silver waves. This is not one stable prehistoric landscape. It changes. Forests retreat in some places, grasslands expand elsewhere, lakes swell and shrink, and rainfall patterns shift across generations. Rivers alter their courses, familiar food disappears from one valley, and new opportunities emerge beyond another ridge. For early humans, climate is not a background scenery, it is pressure. Around 2 million years ago, several species of early Homo lived in Africa, and their relationships remain complicated. Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, early Homo erectus, and perhaps other populations overlapped across portions of this immense period. Their fossils suggest that human evolution resembled a branching thicket far more than a neat ladder. You walk through this uncertain world slowly. A-head volcanic highlands rise beyond an open basin, while acacia-like trees break the horizon into irregular patches. Birds call sharply from the canopy, and insects pulse in the heat with an almost mechanical rhythm. The ground feels hard beneath your feet, but dark clouds are gathering far beyond the hills. Rain might arrive tomorrow, or months from now. That uncertainty helps define the world in which Homo erectus emerged. One influential idea proposes that increasing environmental variability favored human populations capable of flexible behavior rather than narrow specialization. Instead of thriving only within one habitat early, Homo may have benefited from moving between woodland, grassland, lakeshore, and river environments. Researchers sometimes describe this through versions of the variability selection hypothesis. The basic idea is simple enough for your quiet walk tonight. When environments change unpredictably, flexibility can become more valuable than perfect adaptation to one stable setting. Yet scholars disagree about how directly climate shifts drove the appearance of Homo erectus. Fossil dates remain incomplete. Ancient environments are reconstructed from scattered evidence, and evolutionary change rarely follows a single cause. Diet, competition, movement, social behavior, development, and chance probably all played roles. The landscape gives no simple answer. You continue downhill toward a broad lake margin. Mud presses softly beneath your feet, cooler than the dusty ground behind you. Reeds whisper along shallow water, and the smell becomes richer, almost as sweet with decaying vegetation. Animal tracks overlap everywhere, creating a confusing record of hooves, paws, birds, and hominin feet. Such places could be dangerous. They could also be generous. Water attracts prey, edible plants, birds, fish, shellfish, and scavenging opportunities. It also attracts predators eager to enjoy exactly the same resources. A lakeshore is therefore both pantry and trap, which feels rather unfair but very prehistoric. Early Homo populations had to navigate these shifting combinations constantly. Stone becomes increasingly important. You notice rounded cobbles scattered along a stream bed, and one early human lifts a piece, tests its weight, then strikes it against another stone. A sharp edge appears along one side. The action lasts only seconds, but it transforms an ordinary rock into something useful. Simple stone tools had existed before Homo erectus. Older one technology with flakes and cores produced through deliberate percussion stretches deeper into the archaeological record. These tools allowed early humans to cut flesh, process plants, scrape materials, and perhaps access resources unavailable through teeth and hands alone. The technology looks modest. Its consequences were not. Imagine discovering that the landscape itself can be turned into equipment. A stone is no longer merely something beneath your feet. It becomes a cutting-edge hammer scraper or source of flakes carried toward another place. Such behavior requires attention not only to immediate hunger, but also to material properties and future usefulness. Even simple tools change how you perceive the world. Different stones suddenly matter. Distance matters too. If suitable raw material lies several kilometers away, obtaining it requires memory and planning. If food must be carried back toward companions, mobility and sharing become more important. A changing environment therefore rewards not one isolated skill, but combinations of skills that strengthen one another. I'll begin noticing another transformation. The early humans moving through this basin appear increasingly committed to life on the ground. Trees remain useful for shade and perhaps safety, but the body plan developing within early Homo erectus points toward greater terrestrial mobility. Longer legs make traveling efficient. Larger bodies can cover broader ranges. Improved heat management may allow activity across exposed terrain for longer periods. These changes do not happen overnight, of course. There is no morning when one mother looks at her newborn and announces that Homo erectus has finally arrived. Evolution works through populations. Tiny inherited differences, reproductive success changing environments, and enormous amounts of time. Species boundaries become especially fuzzy when viewed this closely. That is one reason African fossils from this period remain so debated. Some researchers distinguish Homo ergaster from Asian Homo erectus, treating African populations as a closely related but separate species. Others prefer a broader Homo erectus category that includes much of this variation within one widespread lineage. The distinction is not merely a naming argument. It affects how scientists reconstruct migration anatomy, adaptation, and relationships between populations across continents. Yet the fossils themselves do not care what Latin label you place beside them. They simply remain: a skull fragment, a jaw, a femur, a handful of teeth. Each one offers a tiny window into lives otherwise almost completely lost. You kneel near the muddy shoreline and imagine one such life beginning nearby. A child wakes before sunrise beside a small group of familiar bodies. Hunger arrives first, followed by warmth, insects, voices, movement, and the ordinary demands of staying alive. Childhood would have been shaped by observation. Which plants are touched? Which are ignored? Which stones are chosen? Where do adults become cautious? These lessons may never leave archaeological traces, yet they could determine survival as strongly as anatomy does. Cultural information, even at a basic level, lets each generation inherit more than genes. That inheritance may have become increasingly important. A quirky detail from this distant era involves the surprisingly wide variety of animals sharing African landscapes with early humans. Giant baboons, saber-toothed cats, enormous pigs, multiple elephant relatives, and unfamiliar antelope forms created ecosystems that would seem almost dreamlike today. To early humans, however, they were ordinary neighbors. Some were food, some were competitors, some were reasons to climb something quickly. The sun climbs higher as you leave the lake behind. Heat gathers along your shoulders while cicadas thicken into a constant buzzing wall of sound. The grass smells dry again and dust sticks lightly to your damp skin. A group moves ahead toward higher ground. They do not know that descendants or close relatives may eventually travel far beyond Africa. They do not imagine Georgia, Java, China, or distant valleys they will never see. Their concerns remain immediate water, food, safety, children, tools, and the next place worth walking toward. Yet this is precisely where the larger story begins. Not with conquest, not with destiny. With movement. When a familiar patch becomes unreliable, you search beyond it. When rain fails, you follow animals or water. When resources improve elsewhere, a group may gradually extend its range across generations. The first migrations may have begun through countless small decisions like these. No map was required, only another horizon. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you look back across the changing African basin. Woodland, open grass, water-stone predators, drought, and opportunity overlap within one restless landscape. From this instability, a remarkably enduring human form was beginning to emerge. Soon its body would carry it farther than any earlier human had traveled. Section 4. The horizon that called to those early African travelers now stretches wider beneath your feet. You follow them across the open country where the ground rises gently, then falls toward another distant ribbon of water. Morning light flashes across dry grass, and a warm wind carries the smell of dust-crushed leaves and animal dung. Somewhere behind you, birds erupt suddenly from a tree, then settle again into the quiet. The group keeps walking. No body appears hurried. That steady pace tells you something important about the body Homo erectus carried into the world compared with many earlier hominins. These humans possessed proportions increasingly suited to long-distance travel across the ground. Their legs were relatively long while their arms became shorter in relation to their bodies. This may sound like a minor anatomical adjustment. It was anything but minor. Longer legs generally make walking more efficient because each stride can cover greater distance without demanding the same proportional energy. A taller body also changes how heat interacts with skin, sunlight, and moving air. Across exposed landscapes, these details can influence whether a traveller reaches water comfortably or arrives dangerously exhausted, or begin matching their rhythm. Heel touches earth, weight rolls forward, toes push away, and the opposite leg swings through with practiced economy. The movement feels ordinary because your own body inherited a similar basic design. Yet millions of years ago, this increasingly modern pattern represented a profound transformation. One famous skeleton helps make that transformation visible. The adolescent commonly called Turkana boy was discovered near Lake Turkana in Kenya during the 1980s. His remarkably complete skeleton dates to roughly 1.5 million years ago and preserves much more of the body than most early human fossils. He was still growing, even so his limbs were strikingly long. His body proportions reveal an individual built much more like a terrestrial traveller than a creature dividing life equally between trees and ground. Researchers disagree about some details of his final adult size, but he was clearly capable of becoming tall by prehistoric standards. You imagine him walking ahead of you now? The sun is already becoming uncomfortable, and the air shimmers slightly above patches of bare earth. Each breath brings a faint mineral taste while warm dust settles against your lips. The young traveller continues forward with surprisingly little wasted movement. There is another advantage hidden beneath the skin. Modern humans are extraordinary sweaters. Compared with many mammals, your body can release large amounts of heat through abundant eccrine sweat glands. Evaporating sweat cools skin effectively, especially when air moves across an exposed body. When this cooling system became fully developed remains uncertain. Hair rarely fossilizes sweat glands, leave no convenient skeleton, and researchers must reconstruct the transition indirectly. Genetic evidence, comparative anatomy, climate, and body proportions all contribute pieces, but no single fossil tells the complete story. Scientists still disagree about exactly when major body hair reduction occurred. Perhaps it became important before classic Homo erectus. Perhaps changes accumulated gradually across early Homo. Whatever the timing, improved heat management would have transformed daytime movement under tropical sunlight. Many predators reduce activity during the hottest hours because overheating becomes dangerous. A sweating human has different possibilities. This observation helped inspire one of the more famous ideas about early human hunting: persistence hunting. In this strategy, hunters pursue an animal repeatedly during heat until the prey becomes exhausted from repeated running and inadequate cooling. The image is wonderfully dramatic. It is also debated. Some researchers argue that endurance running adaptations became important during Homo erectus evolution and may have supported this behavior. Others note that direct evidence for widespread persistence hunting so early remains extremely limited. A capable running body does not prove habitual marathon hunting. Walking may have mattered even more. Ordinary movement between water food patches, carcasses, stone sources, and temporary resting places probably occurred far more often than spectacular hunts. Natural selection can reward efficiency through thousands of unremarkable journeys rather than one cinematic chase. Prehistory often runs on errands. You continue toward the low hills. One adult carries stone material from somewhere behind the group, suggesting useful resources may be transported rather than abandoned after immediate use. Another keeps glancing toward the ground, perhaps following tracks or recognizing plants you would pass without noticing. Mobility increases the value of memory. A wider range means remembering more water sources, dangerous places, seasonal foods, migration routes, and deposits of useful stone. The landscape becomes not merely territory, but a network of remembered opportunities. The feet supporting this network were important too. Homo erectus possessed feet substantially adapted for habitual upright walking, sharing key features with later humans. Fossil footprints from deeper human prehistory already show surprisingly human-like locomotion, but early Homo carried terrestrial commitment even further. You feel hard gravel pressing beneath your soles. Without modern shoes, every surface would matter. Sharp stone, thorns, hot soil, mud, and uneven slopes place repeated stress on feet that must remain functional. Knowledge of pathways could therefore be as valuable as strength itself. The group avoids a patch of rough volcanic debris and follows smoother ground beside a drainage line. Perhaps they learned this route yesterday. Perhaps generations have used it. There is no way to know. Their narrow waist and long limbs also invite questions about endurance running. Some anatomical studies emphasize features that stabilize the head and trunk during running, while others caution against assigning a single purpose to traits shaped by multiple pressures. Evolution rarely builds equipment for only one task. A long leg can help walking, it can help running, it can alter heat exchange, it can change the cost of carrying food or children. That combination may be exactly why the Homo erectus body became so useful across unfamiliar landscapes. Still, mobility came with costs. A larger body requires more calories, and an active traveller must repeatedly locate sufficient food. Longer developmental periods may also place greater demands on adults caring for young individuals. Nothing comes free. You watch a child slow as the group climbs. An adult reduces pace almost immediately. That tiny adjustment reminds you that group travel depends upon the slowest members, not merely the strongest walkers. Children cannot simply be left behind because evolution has produced excellent legs in their parents. Movement must become social. Routes, resting points, food sharing and protection may all need coordination. Even without knowing exactly how sophisticated Homo erectus communication became, successful group travel would require some ability to anticipate one another. The wind becomes cooler near the ridge. You smell water again, though none is visible yet. From higher ground, distant trees form a dark green line that may mark a river or seasonal channel. The travellers notice it before you do and change direction without hesitation. Their bodies can carry them there. Their knowledge tells them why they should go. This partnership between anatomy and behaviour is easy to overlook when studying isolated bones inside museum cases. A femur alone cannot show a remembered spring. A pelvis cannot reveal a seasonal route. Yet bones define what movement makes possible, while learned behaviour determines how those possibilities are used. Homo erectus seems to have combined both unusually well. Across generations, populations could expand gradually beyond familiar ranges. They did not need to understand continents or imagine migration as a historical achievement. They only needed enough physical endurance and behavioural flexibility to continue exploring useful ground. A valley leads toward another valley. A river bends north. Animals move after rain. People follow. By late afternoon, the group reaches the trees you saw from the ridge. Shade settles across your shoulders and the temperature drops noticeably beneath broad branches. Water murmurs nearby over stones with a sound that suddenly makes the entire journey feel worthwhile. Hands touch cool bark. Feet stop moving, for today at least. Yet the body Homo erectus carried was designed for another departure whenever necessity returned. Its proportions made distance increasingly ordinary, and distance would eventually change the geography of humanity itself. Soon these travellers would begin appearing beyond the African landscapes that shaped them, and once they started moving outward, the world became much larger. Section 5. The river beside you bends northward, disappearing between low hills where the land becomes unfamiliar. For the humans resting beneath the trees, there is no sign announcing that Africa ends somewhere ahead. There are only valleys, watercourses, animals, stone weather, and whatever lies beyond the next rise. A landscape does not tell you when you have crossed into another continent. You simply keep moving. Morning returns with cool air sliding along the riverbank. Moist soil darkens beneath your feet and the scent of reeds mixes with dust carried down from higher ground. Small birds chatter in the branches while insects flicker over shallow water. The group begins walking again. Over generations, movements like this would carry early humans farther from their ancestral African ranges than any hominin before them. By roughly 1.8 million years ago, human populations were already present far beyond Africa. The evidence is startlingly early. At Dmanisi in what is now Georgia, archaeologists discovered fossils of early humans dating to about 1.8 million years ago. Their presence shows that members of the human lineage had reached the Caucasus astonishingly soon after early Homo erectus appeared in Africa. That changes the story immediately. For decades, it seemed reasonable to imagine that humans first needed large brains, sophisticated technology and advanced planning before expanding into unfamiliar continents. Dmanisi complicated that comfortable sequence. The travellers who reached that region were not technological superhumans. Their stone tools were comparatively simple. Their brains were modest in say, and yet there they were. You follow an imagined group northward through a corridor of changing vegetation. Grassland gradually gives way to rougher terrain, while distant mountains appear faintly against the sky. The air feels less predictable here, sometimes warm and dry, sometimes carrying colder currents down from higher elevations. Nobody knows exactly why these people moved outward. That uncertainty is important. Earlier explanations often pictured migration as a deliberate expedition, almost like explorers deciding to leave Africa for distant lands. Reality was probably much quieter and more gradual. No council needed to gather. No leader needed to announce a destination. A population might expand its range slightly during favourable seasons. Descendants could establish themselves farther north, then their descendants farther again. Over many generations, ordinary movements become a continental dispersal. Food may have pulled them forward. Changing climate may have pushed them. Perhaps both occurred together. Large herbivores moved across extensive ecological corridors connecting parts of Africa with southwestern Asia. Early humans who depended partly on animal resources could have followed these shifting communities without consciously following a grand migratory route. Waterways would have mattered as well. Rivers create natural pathways through difficult landscapes, providing drinking water plants, animals, and recognizable routes. A group capable of remembering seasonal conditions could move from one dependable patch toward another. You hear water running beside you as the valley narrows. Stone walls rise gently on either side, and your footsteps begin producing faint echoes. The smell of wet rock replaces dry grass while cooler air settles against your arms. Ahead, several people stop beside an exposed bank. One picks up a stone. It's examined briefly, then carried away. That small gesture captures another possible ingredient in expansion. Humans were not merely following food. They were also learning how to recognize useful materials wherever they traveled. A new landscape could become familiar through repeated attention. Which rocks fracture? Well, which plants irritate the skin? Which valley holds water late into the dry season? Where do predators gather? Adaptability may have mattered more than technological complexity. This makes the early dispersal particularly interesting because some regions beyond Africa differed greatly from familiar tropical environments. Temperatures shifted more strongly through seasons, daylight varied, and vegetation followed different annual rhythms. Cold would eventually become a serious challenge. Yet you should not imagine these first travelers marching directly into deep snow beneath glaciers. Climate varied enormously across Eurasia, and favorable habitats could extend much farther north during certain periods. Researchers still debate which routes were most important. The Levant provides one obvious geographic passage between Africa and Eurasia, but fossil and archaeological records remain incomplete. Coastal pathways, inland valleys, river systems, and shifting ecological corridors may all have contributed at different times. Sea levels change too. Landscapes now submerged beneath modern water may once have been exposed, meaning some ancient routes are hidden beyond the reach of ordinary excavation. The map you know today is not the map these travelers experienced. Even shorelines moved. That thought is oddly soothing. You stand in a place that may no longer exist. Wind passes across grass where a modern coastline might someday appear, and footsteps sink into sediment eventually buried beneath thousands of years of geological change. Human history is full of vanished roads that never had names. One quirky possibility concerns how little equipment early travelers may have needed. Popular imagination often dresses prehistoric migration like a carefully supplied expedition with bundles of tools and planned camps. In reality, a skilled stoneworker can create cutting edges quickly whenever suitable rock appears. You do not need to carry an entire workshop. You carry knowledge. That may be one reason simple technology was powerful. A sharp flake can be produced, used, discarded, and replaced. Fire, if regularly controlled at this stage, might have expanded available environments further, though evidence for habitual fire use this early remains uncertain. The darkness would therefore feel different. You imagine evening arriving in an unfamiliar valley without dependable flames. The temperature falls quickly after sunset and dampness begins creeping through vegetation. Somewhere beyond the camp, an animal calls with a deep, repetitive sound. No one knows whether tomorrow's route leads toward richer ground or greater danger. The group remains close. Children settle near adults. Tools lie within reach. Even without elaborate technology, social proximity provides warmth, warning, information, and perhaps reassurance. A lone traveler faces the world differently from several people watching in different directions. Traveling together also creates problems, of course. More mouths require more food. Young children, slow movement. Injured individuals may complicate decisions. The group must balance mobility against the advantages of remaining near known resources. Migration is therefore unlikely to have been constant forward progress. People probably stopped. They returned. They spread sideways. Some populations disappeared completely. Others endured. This messy pattern is more realistic than a clean arrow drawn across a textbook map. As generations pass, in your imagination the landscape changes around you. Dry plains become greener valleys, then rocky uplands, then broad open country again. People are born in places their distant ancestors never saw. For them, these places are not foreign, they are home. That distinction matters because migration often sounds dramatic only when viewed from thousands of years later. A child born north of the Caucasus does not remember Africa as a lost homeland. The child knows this stream, this ridge, this smell after rain. The great expansion of humanity may therefore have been built from millions of small local decisions rather than one heroic journey. You reach a high point near sunset. Behind you lies a chain of valleys extending farther than you can see. Ahead, another broad landscape opens beneath orange light, crossed by animal trails and scattered patches of trees. The wind is colder here. It touches your face with a warning of environments still farther north. The travellers beside you pause only briefly before descending. Their journey has already become something unprecedented. Early humans have moved beyond the continent where their lineage began, carrying bodies shaped for distance and knowledge, flexible enough to make strange ground usable. Soon you will meet some of the earliest travellers preserved in extraordinary detail. They are waiting at D Manis, Section 6. The colder wind follows you down from the ridge until the landscape opens into a broad basin surrounded by distant mountains. You are now standing near D Manisi in present-day Georgia, more than 1.7 million years before modern roads crossed this region. The morning air feels crisp against your face, carrying the smell of damp soil grass and stone warmed slowly by sunlight. Somewhere nearby, hoofed animals move across open ground while birds circle above the valley. This place changes what you thought early humans needed. The fossils found here belong to some of the earliest known human populations outside Africa. They lived roughly 1.8 million years ago, making Dmanisi one of the most important sites in the story of human dispersal. Yet their anatomy surprises you. Their brains were relatively small. Some individuals had brain volumes closer to earlier Homo than to later Homo erectus populations. Their bodies were also smaller than the tall, long-limbed image you may now associate with Turkana boy. And still they had travelled far. That simple fact unsettled older assumptions about human expansion across continents. For years, many researchers imagined a neat progression. First came larger brains, then sophisticated Acheulean tools, then larger bodies, and only afterward came migration beyond Africa. Dmanisi refused to behave properly. The people here appear to have managed with comparatively simple stone tools, smaller brains and bodies that retained some primitive features. Their success suggests that leaving Africa did not require a dramatic package of advanced technology. You walk toward a low area where ancient sediments once accumulated. The ground under your feet feels uneven and slightly damp. Fine grit sticks to your fingers when you kneel while cool air drifts down from higher slopes. Imagine one of these early humans crouching nearby. The face would seem unfamiliar with the projecting jaw and strong brow region. Yet the hand-sorting stones look purposeful, choosing pieces that can fracture into sharp edges. The tools associated with Dmanisi are simple. They resemble Oldowan traditions known from Africa, including flakes cores and basic cutting implements. There is no need here for elegant hand axes or elaborate equipment before a population can survive beyond its ancestral continent. Knowledge travels lightly. A suitable stone becomes a tool. A familiar-looking valley becomes a possible route. An animal carcass becomes food if you know how to cut through hide. This flexibility may have mattered more than carrying a large inventory. You continue through the basin while clouds gather over distant mountains. Seasonal conditions here would have differed from many warmer African environments. Winters could be colder and resource patterns would shift through the year. These travellers therefore had to deal with greater environmental variation. How exactly they managed remains uncertain. Reliable fire would have helped enormously, but clear evidence for habitual fire use at Dmanisi is lacking. Warm clothing is possible in principle, yet direct evidence does not survive. Perhaps they used animal hides. Perhaps they sheltered in protected locations. Perhaps they simply occupied the region during favourable conditions and moved when seasons became harsher. Researchers still debate how permanent these populations were. The landscape itself offers possibilities. Rock formations create sheltered spaces, valleys protect against some winds, and seasonal animal movements could provide predictable food opportunities. A group that understood local terrain might survive without technologies later humans considered essential. Then you encounter one of Dmanisi's most quietly remarkable individuals. An elderly person lived here after losing nearly all of their teeth. The jaw had healed long before death, meaning this individual survived for a significant period with severely reduced chewing ability. For paleoanthropologists, that survival raises fascinating questions. How did this person eat? Soft natural foods may have been available. Food could have been processed using tools. Other group members may also have helped by sharing softer portions or preparing food in ways easier to consume. You cannot prove the final possibility. Still it lingers. You imagine evenings settling across the basin as several individuals gather close together. One person tears soft tissue from food and places it within reach of the toothless elder. No speech survives. No gesture fossilizes. Only a healed jaw remains. It is a wonderfully small clue to the possibility that social tolerance mattered within these early communities. An elderly individual can also carry useful knowledge. Perhaps this person remembers water sources, animal behavior, or dangerous valleys from previous seasons. Physical weakness does not necessarily erase value within a social group. That idea feels strangely modern. Yet you should resist making the people of Dmanisi too familiar. Their social lives remain largely unknown, and interpretations can easily outrun the evidence. Prehistory rewards imagination, then immediately asks you to behave yourself. You move farther across the site. Several skulls found at Dmanisi display striking differences in size and shape. At first glance, such variation might tempt you to assign them to different species. That possibility produced major debate. One especially complete skull, often called Skull 5, combined a small brain case with a large face and robust jaw. Its unusual anatomy highlighted how much variation might exist within one early human population. Some researchers have argued that this variability supports grouping several early homoforms more broadly. Others remain cautious and emphasize that geographic and chronological differences still matter. The argument continues. Species boundaries this deep in time are rarely simple. You look around the basin and imagine 5 individuals standing together. One has a more delicate face. Another carries a heavier jaw. Their skull shapes differ noticeably, yet they may still belong to the same breeding population, just as modern humans can vary considerably in appearance without belonging to separate species. Fossils can exaggerate uncertainty because only fragments remain. One skull becomes a category. One jaw becomes a debate. A single new discovery can rearrange decades of confident diagrams. Dmanisi is particularly valuable because several individuals came from one location and broadly similar time. Together they show variation that isolated fossils cannot easily reveal. This may be the site's strangest lesson. Human evolution looks tidier when evidence is scarce. The more people you find, the messier humanity becomes. You smile at that thought as the wind strengthens. Grass brushes against your legs, carrying the dry, rustling sound of approaching evening. The air smells colder now, mixed with stone and the faint scent of animals moving nearby. A group begins crossing the slope. Their pace is unhurried. They are not giants. They do not carry beautiful hand axes. Their brains do not approach modern human size. Still they are here. That presence forces you to reconsider what made early humans successful. Perhaps sophisticated technology was not the first requirement. Perhaps behavioral flexibility mattered earlier. Perhaps social learning, mobility, simple tools, and willingness to exploit unfamiliar environments were enough to open enormous new territories. The Dmanisi people also remind you that evolution does not always wait for perfection. A body can be good enough. A tool can be simple enough. A group can survive without possessing every later innovation. Selection works with what exists. The travelers descend toward lower ground as the sky turns pale gold. Long shadows stretch behind them and the surrounding mountains darken into broad silhouettes. Somewhere beyond those mountains lie more valleys. Beyond those valleys lie steppe, desert, forest, and river systems leading eastward across Eurasia. You know that early humans did not need to become fully modern before continuing. They only needed to keep adapting. And from this Caucasian crossroads, the human trail begins stretching farther into Asia. Section 7. The mountains behind Dmanisi gradually fade into distance and the land ahead begins opening into something almost impossibly vast. You follow the imagined human trail eastward, not along one road because no such road exists. Instead, movement follows rivers, valleys, lake shores, animal paths, and strips of land where water remains dependable through changing seasons. The morning air smells of wet grass and cold stone while a broad river murmurs somewhere below the slope. For early humans, rivers are more than scenery. They are guides. A river offers drinking water, fish, edible plants, birds, grazing animals, and trees that provide shade or useful materials. Its banks also create natural corridors through landscapes that might otherwise feel confusing or hostile. You descend toward the water. Mud gives slightly beneath your feet and cool mist hangs above the shallows. Reeds click softly against one another, while insects drift across the surface in glittering clouds. Farther upstream, a herd approaches, cautiously stopping often to test the wind. A human group would notice that herd immediately. Water concentrates life. That makes river valleys attractive, but it also makes them dangerous. Predators understand the same geography and competition around water can become intense during dry periods. Still, the advantages are enormous. Across generations, populations associated with Homo erectus spread through large parts of Asia. Fossils and stone tools indicate early human occupation across regions extending from western Eurasia toward eastern and southeastern Asia. The exact routes remain uncertain. Researchers continue debating how many dispersal waves occurred and whether different populations followed separate pathways at different times. River systems probably mattered greatly, but ancient geography has changed so much that many travel corridors are now hidden beneath sediments, deserts, reservoirs, or seas. The continent you are crossing is not the Asia shown on a modern map. Coastlines shift, lakes appear and vanish. Grasslands expand into places later covered by forest. During wetter periods, regions that now seem harsh could become inviting corridors filled with animals and fresh water. You walk onward as generations quietly pass around you. A child born beside one river grows old near another, hundreds of kilometers away. No single person experiences the continental journey you can see from your distant perspective. Expansion occurs slowly through countless short movements that barely feel like migration at all. A family follows grazing animals downstream. Another group discovers better stone farther east. Children establish themselves near a new lake. Their descendants continue. Eventually, what began as local movement becomes one of the greatest geographic expansions in early human history. There is something almost peaceful about its slowness. Nobody wakes one morning planning to reach East Asia. People simply respond to opportunity. A valley contains food, so they remain. The rains fail, so they leave. Animals move and humans move too. This rhythm may repeat for thousands of years before populations become permanently established in distant regions. The landscape changes beneath you again. Open grassland becomes wooded river country where filtered sunlight falls across damp ground. The air smells richer here, filled with leaves, mud, and decaying vegetation. Mosquitoes gather near your face with impressive prehistoric enthusiasm. You can almost hear your ancestors regretting the river already. Yet wooded environments offer new resources. Tubers, fruits, nuts, small animals, eggs, and freshwater foods could supplement meat obtained through scavenging or hunting. A flexible diet helps travelers enter habitats where familiar resources become rare. Homo erectus seems to have possessed exactly this kind of adaptability. The details remain difficult to reconstruct because diet rarely leaves a complete record. Toothware, animal bones, stone tools, chemical evidence, and environmental remains provide clues, but each site captures only part of the picture. What people ate in one valley may differ greatly from what they ate thousands of kilometers away. That flexibility is probably important. A specialist succeeds beautifully until its favorite resource disappears. A generalist complains quietly, then eats something else. Homo erectus increasingly looks like the second kind. You notice several individuals near the riverbank collecting stones. One tests a cobble against another and produces a sharp flake. Another carries material that appears to come from farther away, suggesting people may have remembered specific locations where useful rock could be found. Such knowledge turns geography into something personal. A river bend becomes the place where sharp stone appears. A grove becomes the place where fruit ripens. A cliff becomes the place where predators sometimes wait. A shallow crossing becomes the safest route after rain. These mental maps need no writing. They live in repeated movement. Children watch adults choose paths and gradually learn which decisions matter. A young person who remembers water during drought carries knowledge that can benefit the entire group. Researchers cannot determine exactly how much information Homo erectus deliberately taught. Some skills may have been copied simply through observation, while others could have involved demonstration gesture or vocal instruction. Scholars still disagree about the complexity of communication in these populations. Whatever the method, traditions persisted. Stoneworking techniques appeared repeatedly across enormous periods. Routes were likely reused. Food processing habits may have been learned locally and passed onward. This creates a quieter kind of inheritance, not genetic inheritance, cultural inheritance. You pass beneath a tree as rain begins tapping softly against broad leaves. The smell of wet earth rises almost immediately. Cold drops land across your arms and the river's surface darkens beneath thousands of tiny impacts. Travel now becomes harder. Mud thickens. Slopes become slippery. Small streams swell unexpectedly. For modern travelers, a storm is inconvenient. For people without permanent shelter, waterproof clothing, or reliable stored food, weather could alter every decision. Yet repeated exposure teaches patterns. Certain clouds mean heavy rain. A river becomes unsafe after storms upstream. High ground remains dry. Animals shelter in predictable places. This kind of practical environmental knowledge leaves almost no archaeological trace, although it may have been essential to survival. A particularly curious feature of early human dispersal is how quickly populations reached very distant parts of Asia compared with the slow pace of biological evolution. Bodies changed over generations, but behavior could adjust within a lifetime. That makes learned flexibility unusually powerful. A new climate does not always require a new species. Sometimes it requires a new habit. You wait beneath the tree until the rain weakens. Mist now rises from the ground and the world smells clean green and unfamiliar. The group ahead begins moving again beside the swollen river. Farther east, other populations are already entering landscapes their African ancestors never experienced. Some regions are seasonal and cool. Others are warm and humid. Some contain immense river systems. Others open into broad plains where herds move across distances difficult to imagine. Not every expansion succeeds. Some groups vanish after droughts, floods, disease, or simple bad luck. Population numbers may have remained small, making local extinction dangerously easy. Yet other groups continue. That repeated ability to establish new populations matters more than any single successful journey. I begin to see Homo erectus, not as one marching wave, but as countless flickering communities scattered across enormous space. Some exist for centuries, others, perhaps far longer, connected only indirectly through generations of movement. Their world is fragmented, and still humanity spreads. One debated question concerns whether early humans could cross meaningful stretches of water. Later, Homo erectus populations reached islands in Southeast Asia that sometimes required navigating complex, changing coastlines. Lower sea levels connected many regions that are islands today, but not every crossing was necessarily dry land. Scholars still argue whether any journeys involved accidental rafting, simple deliberate watercraft, or routes that remain poorly reconstructed. The thought is wonderfully strange. You picture several humans clinging to floating vegetation after a storm drifting somewhere nobody intended to visit. Perhaps that never happened. Perhaps it happened many times. Prehistory is generous with possibilities and stingy with witnesses. Even without solving that mystery, the general direction becomes clear. The rivers continue eastward. So do the people. Evening settles across the valley, turning wet stones dark and reflective. Frogs begin calling near the bank, while smoke-coloured clouds break apart above distant hills. The travellers disappear gradually into the trees. Ahead of them lies a warmer world of monsoon rains, tropical forests, volcanic islands, and unfamiliar animals. Far beyond the next rivers, one destination will become especially important. Java is waiting. Section 8. The river valleys gradually become warmer, wetter, and greener, until the landscape around you feels completely transformed. You are approaching Java, part of what is now Indonesia, though the coastline before you would look unfamiliar today. Sea levels changed repeatedly through the Pleistocene, exposing broad areas of land across Southeast Asia. Islands connected, separated, and changed shape as glaciers grew and melted far away. The air is heavy with moisture. Leaves shine after recent rain, insects buzz beneath the canopy, and warm mud presses softly around your feet. The smell of wet vegetation is rich and almost sweet, mixed with volcanic earth and distant animal musk. This is very different from East African grassland. Yet Homo erectus lives here. That fact alone reveals something extraordinary about the species you have been following. These humans were not restricted to one narrow climate or landscape. Populations survived in places ranging from relatively open environments to regions influenced by tropical forests and monsoon systems. Java became one of the most important locations in the history of Homo erectus research. In the late 19th century, a Dutch anatomist named Eugène Dubois travelled to the Dutch East Indies searching for evidence of human evolution. His search eventually brought him to the banks of the Solar River near Trinil. Their fossils began emerging from ancient sediments. A skullcap appeared, then a femur. Dubois believed he had found an evolutionary form between apes and humans, and he eventually named it Pithecanthropus erectus. Later classification placed these remains within Homo erectus. The discovery became famous. It also became controversial. Some scientists doubted the fossils belonged together, while others questioned what kind of creature they represented. Human evolution was still deeply contested, and one partial skull could provoke arguments lasting decades. The skull did not come with helpful notes. That seems to be a recurring problem. You walk along the imagined Solo River under pale morning light. Water moves slowly through the broad channel, carrying leaves and broken branches downstream. Cicadas pulse from nearby trees while distant monkeys call from vegetation you cannot see clearly. A Homo erectus individual stands near the bank. The skull would display several features familiar from other Asian fossils: a long, low cranial vault, strong brow ridges, and thick cranial bones. Brain size varied, but many later Javan populations possessed larger brains than the earliest humans you encountered at Dmanisi. This was not a frozen species. Homo erectus changed over time. Populations living for hundreds of thousands of years could develop regional characteristics while maintaining a broadly recognizable anatomical pattern. That is one reason classification remains difficult when fossils from Java, China, Africa, and Georgia are compared. Researchers still argue about how much variation belongs inside Homo erectus. Some prefer a broad species extending across Africa and Eurasia. Others divide certain African or Asian populations more carefully. For your journey tonight, the disagreement itself is useful. It reminds you that Homo erectus was not one identical population copied repeatedly across continents. These humans lived in different environments at different times under different pressures. Java adds another layer of complexity. During periods of lower sea level, much of western Indonesia formed part of a large exposed landmass called Sundaland. Java could be connected more directly with mainland Southeast Asia, allowing animals and humans to move across territories now drowned beneath shallow seas. But those connections changed. A route available during one period might disappear beneath water later. This means populations could become isolated. Isolation encourages regional change. It can also trap communities when climate, vegetation, or food supplies shift. You continue inland. Rainwater drips from leaves even though the storm has already passed. Your skin feels damp almost immediately, and every shaded surface seems alive with movement. The animals here would have seemed unfamiliar to early African ancestors. Java supported various large mammals through different periods, including elephants, bovids, deer, and powerful predators. The precise combinations changed as climates and habitats shifted. Homo erectus had to learn them: which animals were dangerous, which could be scavenged, which plants could be eaten, where did water remain during dry months. An adaptable traveller cannot simply repeat African habits forever. Local knowledge becomes essential. A child born on Java would grow up learning a landscape that Africa never taught directly. The child might recognize monsoon patterns, river behavior, fruiting seasons, and animal trails specific to this region. This is where cultural learning becomes especially important. Genes cannot explain where one particular river floods. They cannot identify which volcanic slope holds useful stone. They cannot warn that one grove becomes dangerous after sunset. Those details must be earned during life. You notice stone tools scattered near an imagined river terrace. Compared with the classic Acheulean hand axe traditions, known from parts of Africa and western Eurasia, Southeast Asian assemblages often look different. Large hand axes are less common in many early sites east of a broad boundary once called the Movius line. This pattern became famous in Okiai. One older explanation suggested eastern Homo erectus populations possessed less advanced technology. That interpretation now looks too simple because raw materials, preservation, local traditions, bamboo use, and different ecological needs could all shape tool assemblages. Bamboo is particularly intriguing. It grows abundantly in parts of tropical Asia and can be sharpened, split, cut, or shaped into useful implements. Unfortunately, organic materials decay much more readily than stone, so an entire toolkit could vanish. Researchers have long wondered whether bamboo tools partly explain why some Asian sites seem technologically sparse compared with Acheulean regions. Direct evidence remains limited, and scholars continue debating how much importance bamboo really had. Still, the possibility changes the scene. A simple stone flake may be only the first step. It could sharpen a wooden point. It could split bamboo. It could produce tools that leave almost nothing behind after thousands of years. Archaeology often favors stone because stone is stubborn. Wood is less cooperative. You move beneath taller trees as afternoon light becomes green and diffuse. The forest floor feels cooler here, though humidity wraps around you like a thin blanket. Some paleoenvironmental evidence suggests Javanese. Homo erectus populations did not necessarily inhabit dense rainforest continuously. Open woodland, grassland, riverine habitat, and changing mosaics likely existed at different times. That distinction matters. The popular image of Homo erectus permanently wandering through thick jungle may be misleading. Java itself changed repeatedly as rainfall, volcanic activity, sea levels, and regional climates shifted. Volcanoes were especially important. The island sits within one of Earth's most active volcanic regions. Eruptions could destroy local habitats, cover landscapes in ash, and later produce mineral-rich soils supporting renewed vegetation. For humans, volcanoes were both threat and opportunity. No one understood plate tectonics. A mountain simply became loud. Ash fell. Animals moved. People adapted or left. You imagine a distant eruption coloring the evening horizon. The ground gives a faint tremor beneath your feet while birds become restless in the canopy. Fine ash begins falling lightly, settling onto broad leaves and darkening the water's edge. The Homo erectus group watches. Perhaps they have seen this before. Perhaps older members recognize what follows. Knowledge accumulated across generations can turn catastrophe into something slightly less mysterious. A remembered safe valley, alternate water source, or seasonal route may mean the difference between persistence and disappearance. This capacity for local adjustment helps explain why Homo erectus survived so long across Java. Some of the youngest widely discussed Homo erectus fossils come from Ngandong, also along the Solar River system. Dating these remains has been difficult, but research places them surprisingly late in the Pleistocene compared with the species' earliest appearance. If those dates and classifications hold, Homo erectus may have survived on Java far longer than elsewhere. Think about that span. The species arrives in Asia in deep prehistory. Then some populations continue through enormous environmental change before finally disappearing. Generations rise and vanish while rivers alter course and entire animal communities transform around them. This is endurance on a geological scale. Evening now gathers beside the river. Frogs call from muddy shallows, insects thicken. In the humid air and the scent of wet leaves becomes stronger as temperatures fall slightly. A group settles somewhere beyond the trees. You cannot hear their words. You do not know whether they tell stories, joke, argue, or sit mostly in silence. But you know something more important. They belong here. Java is no temporary edge of the human world anymore. For generations beyond counting, it has become home. And in the stone tools, river sediments, and heavy-browed skulls left behind, you can already sense the quiet intelligence that made such endurance possible. Section 9. The humid forests of Java begin to fade behind you, and another landscape slowly takes shape beneath a broad, pale sky. You are standing beside a shallow river where rounded stones lie scattered across exposed gravel bars. Water moves gently between them, making a soft clicking sound whenever smaller pebbles shift in the current. The air smells of wet minerals, surfaces, sun-warmed grass, and faint animal musk drifting from farther upstream. One of the humans beside you bends down. A stone is lifted. It turns slowly in the hand, then another stone strikes it. The sound is sharp and surprisingly clean. A fragment breaks away, leaving behind an edge capable of slicing hide, cutting flesh, shaving wood, or opening plant material. To modern eyes, the action can look almost trivial. Yet this simple relationship between handstone force angle and intention represents one of humanity's longest technological traditions. Stone remembers what softer materials forget. Wood rots, fiber disappears. Skin decays, stone waits. That stubbornness is one reason archaeologists know so much about ancient technology, while knowing painfully little about many other parts of Homo erectus life. A tool dropped beside water can survive long after every voice footprint, woven fiber, wooden implement, and shelter nearby has vanished. You crouch beside the toolmaker. The hands are strong, but strength alone does not create a useful flake. The stone must be struck at an appropriate angle with enough force to fracture predictably without simply crushing the edge. Experience matters, so does selection. Not every rock behaves equally. Some fracture cleanly, others crumble. A skilled individual gradually learns the difference through repeated practice, and that knowledge can be carried toward another generation without leaving written instructions. Early Homo erectus populations often used relatively simple core and flake technologies similar to earlier Oldowan traditions. In parts of Africa, however, a new technological pattern appears around the early Acheulean period beginning more than 1.7 million years ago. The most famous objects are hand axes. You see one lying in the dirt ahead. It's broader near the base, tapering toward a narrower end, with flakes removed from both surfaces. The overall shape appears deliberate rather than accidental. You pick it up carefully. Its surface feels cool and rough against your palm. The object fits surprisingly well in the hand, although archaeologists still debate exactly how different hand axe forms were used. Cutting meat is one possibility, but woodworking, plant processing, digging, and other tasks may also have mattered. There was probably no single hand axe job description. That would be unusually organized for the Pleistocene. The important point is flexibility. A durable cutting implement can perform many tasks during travel, especially when populations move through environments where suitable stone is unevenly distributed. Some hand axes may have been carried resharpened and reused rather than discarded immediately. Others were left where they were made. You can sometimes imagine the sequence from the debris. Flakes scatter around a working area. A core becomes smaller. One unsuccessful strike produces an awkward fracture. Perhaps someone mutters an early human equivalent of mild disappointment. The archaeological record remains tactfully silent. Kiplean hand axes are especially fascinating because many display striking symmetry. Some are carefully shaped along both sides, producing forms that seem aesthetically satisfying even to modern observers. This has generated decades of argument. Were symmetrical hand axes simply efficient tools? Did symmetry demonstrate skill? Could particularly impressive examples have carried social meaning? A few researchers have even proposed that finely made hand axes may sometimes have functioned partly as displays of competence, perhaps influencing status or mate choice. The idea is provocative and difficult to prove. No hand axe has ever explained its romantic intentions. Still, extreme examples raise questions. Some specimens are unusually large or finely shaped, appearing more elaborate than necessary for ordinary cutting. Perhaps these objects reflected craftsmanship, teaching, identity, ritualized behavior, or nothing, more mysterious than a capable toolmaker enjoying precision. Scholars remain divided over how much symbolic meaning should be read into such objects. Caution is wise. Beauty to you may have been practicality to them. You continue walking along the riverbank while several individuals search among exposed stones. One person selects a particular kind, repeatedly ignoring many others. That pattern matters. Stone choice can reveal knowledge. If useful material comes from a specific source, people must recognize it, remember where it occurs, and sometimes transport it across the landscape. Archaeologists have found evidence at various early sites that stone was moved away from its geological origin. The distances are often modest by modern standards, but every carried kilogram costs energy. Transport therefore suggests that certain materials were valuable enough to justify effort. A good stone could become future cutting edges, and future usefulness requires at least some anticipation. Planning appears quietly, not a 5-year plan, not even a 5-day plan, just the awareness that an object useful later deserves carrying now. That small mental step matters enormously. The sun climbs higher. Heat settles on your shoulders while the mineral smell of the riverbank becomes stronger. Somewhere across the water, hoofed animals splash through a shallow crossing. The toolmaker keeps working. Strike, turn, inspect, strike again. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. I begin thinking about learning. A novice cannot master controlled stone fracture simply by owning the correct rock. The movements must be observed, attempted, corrected, and repeated. Did Homo erectus teach deliberately? That remains uncertain. A child could learn partly by watching adults closely copying their gestures until accidental success became reliable skill. More active demonstration may also have occurred. Perhaps an adult positioned a young hand. Perhaps a failed strike was corrected. Perhaps the learner simply watched for years. Archaeology cannot easily distinguish these possibilities. Yet long-lived technological traditions strongly suggest that information passed between generations with enough consistency to preserve recognizable methods. That is culture in a basic sense, not museums, not literature, shared behavior. The Acheulean tradition lasted for more than 1 million years across parts of Africa and Eurasia. Few technological designs in later human history have persisted on anything approaching that scale. Your smartphone would be embarrassed, for Homo erectus technological change often seems slow when measured against modern innovation. That slowness once encouraged assumptions that early humans lacked creativity. But another interpretation is possible. If a tool works reliably, changing it constantly provides little advantage. Stability can be successful. A hand axe suitable for butchering, woodworking, or other practical tasks does not become inferior simply because generations continue making similar forms. A tradition surviving hundreds of thousands of years may represent effectiveness rather than stagnation. You turn the stone over again. The symmetry seems almost meditative. Each flake scar records a decision. Some removals are deep, others are shallow. The maker had to respond continuously to the changing shape of the object, adjusting each strike according to what the previous strike produced. This is not mindless repetition. It is controlled improvisation. Still, not every Homo erectus population made classic hand axes. As you saw farther east, many Asian assemblages contain different technological patterns. This geographic variation once inspired the concept of the Mobius line dividing regions rich in Acheulean hand axes from eastern areas where such tools appeared rare or absent. Today that boundary looks less rigid. New discoveries have complicated the picture while researchers increasingly consider local stone quality, ecology, preservation, and alternative materials. Technology follows environment. A population surrounded by excellent bamboo may solve problems differently from one living among abundant flint or quartzite. If wooden and bamboo tools formed major parts of Eastern toolkits, much of their technological world has simply dissolved. This possibility is especially humbling. You may be judging ancient intelligence from the small fraction of equipment geology agreed to preserve. Even stone itself can mislead. A beautifully shaped hand axe attracts attention in a museum case. A plain flake may look unimpressive, yet its edge can be extremely sharp and immediately useful. Complex appearance is not the same as practical value. The people around you know this instinctively. One individual spends considerable time shaping a large bifacial tool. Another makes a quick flake, uses it, and leaves it behind. Both strategies work. Late afternoon light begins spreading across the river. The sharp knocking of stone gradually stops, replaced by flowing water, and insects beginning their evening calls. A finished tool disappears into one traveller's hand as the group begins moving again. The stone carries more than a cutting edge. It carries learned technique, memory, habit, perhaps preference, and somewhere behind the traveller's scattered flakes remain among the gravel, waiting for distant descendants to wonder what kind of minds produced them. The answer is not simple, but it is becoming harder to call those minds primitive. Section 10. The finished stone tool disappears into a traveller's hand, but another transformation waits farther ahead in the gathering darkness. You smell it before you see it. A faint ribbon of smoke drifts between trees, carrying the dry scent of burned grass and warm wood. The evening air has cooled enough that the smell feels comforting rather than threatening. Somewhere nearby, orange light flickers against stone and then briefly vanishes. Fire. Few things seem more naturally human to you now. You cook with it, heat rooms with it, light candles with it, and rarely wonder when your ancestors first stopped fearing flame. Yet for Homo erectus, fire may have represented one of the most difficult transitions in human history. Finding fire is easy. Keeping it is harder. Lightning strikes grasslands. Volcanoes ignite vegetation. Dry branches burn after natural sparks. Early humans almost certainly encountered wild flames long before they understood how to control them reliably. Imagine approaching such a fire. Heat presses against your face while smoke makes your eyes water. Branches crack loudly and sparks rise into the darkening sky. Animals retreat from the burning edge, leaving behind a landscape transformed by heat. At first, fire is probably something to avoid, then perhaps something to exploit. A natural burn can expose dead animals, roasted roots, seeds, insects, and small creatures trapped by flames. Charred landscapes may also encourage new plant growth, later attracting grazing animals back into the area. Someone eventually notices these patterns. Someone always notices. Perhaps a glowing branch can be moved. Perhaps embers survive beneath ash. Perhaps flame can be carried from one natural fire toward another place. This is not the same as creating fire from nothing. That distinction matters greatly. The earliest evidence for controlled fire is difficult to interpret because natural fires leave many of the same traces as human ones. Burned bones, reddened sediments, ash and charcoal may result from lightning, wildfire, volcanic activity, or deliberate burning. Researchers therefore look closely at context. Was burning concentrated in one small area? Did it occur repeatedly? Were stone tools nearby? Did burned materials appear deep inside a cave where natural wildfire would be less likely? Questions like these turn tiny patches of ash into major archaeological arguments. One important site lies in South Africa. At Wonderwork Cave, researchers have identified burned plant material and bone within cave sediments dating to roughly 1 million years ago. Because the evidence occurs well inside the cave, many scholars consider it strong evidence for controlled fire. If that interpretation is correct, humans were managing flames very early, possibly Homo erectus. You step into the imagined cave. Outside sunlight remains bright, but the interior quickly becomes cool and dim. Your footsteps scrape softly across dusty ground, and the smell changes from grass to mineral stone. Then you see a small glow, not a roaring bonfire, just embers. That may be closer to the beginning. Fire does not need to be spectacular to change life. A modest flame provides light after sunset, warmth during cold nights, and smoke that discourages insects and perhaps protection from some predators. It also changes food. Cooking softens many plant tissues and animal foods, making chewing easier, sometimes improving digestibility. Heat can reduce certain pathogens and toxins, although not every food becomes safer simply because it meets a flame. The evolutionary importance of cooking has inspired a major hypothesis. Some researchers argue that cooked food provided more usable energy and helped support changes in human anatomy, including smaller digestive structures and larger brains. Others caution that secure archaeological evidence for habitual cooking appears later than the earliest anatomical changes attributed to Homo erectus. The timing remains debated. Once again, the fossils refuse to organize themselves around an elegant theory. You sit near the fire and extend your hands. Warmth reaches your palms immediately. The contrast with the cool cave air is striking, and it becomes easy to imagine how fire might transform nighttime behavior. Without flame, darkness sharply limits visual activity. With fire, the day becomes longer. Tools can be worked after sunset. Food can be processed. Children can remain near light while adults maintain watch. Social interaction may continue during hours, once dominated by darkness. What happened around those fires is almost impossible to reconstruct. Did people groom one another? Did they gesture about the day? Did older individuals demonstrate tool-making? Did they simply sit quietly and enjoy not being cold? Perhaps all of these occurred at different times. The fire creates a center. That alone can reorganize space. You notice everyone naturally turning toward it. Even tonight, modern humans often arrange themselves in a circle around flames without needing instructions. A campfire seems almost strangely effective at convincing people to stare at burning wood for hours. Homo erectus may have discovered the same entertainment package. There is another advantage: smoke. Anyone who has sat beside an imperfect campfire knows that smoke possesses an extraordinary ability to follow whichever person dislikes it most. Yet smoke can also discourage mosquitoes and other biting insects. In tropical environments that could matter, smoke may help preserve food briefly as well, although direct evidence for sophisticated smoking practices among Homo erectus is lacking. The possibility remains interesting because fire offers benefits beyond obvious heat and cooking. Still, possession creates responsibility. A flame must be fed, wood must remain dry enough to burn, embers must survive rain and movement. If people cannot reliably create new fire, losing one could become a serious problem. You imagine the group preparing to leave the cave. One individual selects a partially burned branch. Another gathers dry fibers or bark. Perhaps glowing material is wrapped carefully within something that allows airflow while slowing combustion. Ethnographic societies have used many methods to transport embers, but projecting those exact practices into Homo erectus would be speculation. The broader problem is real. How do you keep fire alive? A burning log weighs something. Hot embers can injure you. Rain can extinguish them. Strong wind can scatter sparks. Maintaining flame across moving landscapes requires attention that a naturally occurring wildfire does not. This may explain why habitual fire use was such an important threshold. There is a difference between occasionally benefiting from flames and organizing daily life around them. Other sites offer later evidence. At Gesher Benot Yaakov in the Jordan Valley, burned seeds, wood and stone artifacts dating to roughly 790,000 years ago appear concentrated in patterns suggesting repeated fire use. That site is particularly interesting because burning occurs in several archaeological levels. Repetition matters. One isolated patch can be an accident. Repeatedly patterned burning becomes harder to dismiss. By several 100,000 years ago, evidence for controlled fire becomes more common across parts of Africa and Eurasia. Yet even then, fire use may not have been universal or continuous. This uncertainty creates an important correction to popular images. Homo erectus did not necessarily spend every evening gathered around a perfectly maintained campfire. Some populations may have used flame regularly. Others may have used it occasionally. Some may have lost the practice during difficult periods. Technology can disappear when population numbers shrink or knowledge transmission breaks. Progress does not always move forward. The fire beside you begins collapsing into red embers. Ash settles gently across blackened wood while the smell becomes deeper and sweeter. Beyond the cave entrance, insects pulse in darkness, and something large moves through brush without coming closer. Perhaps flame is helping. Perhaps you only hope it is. You consider what fire would mean during colder migrations. Warmth allows longer activity in chilly environments and may expand sleeping options. Firelight also provides psychological comfort, although emotions leave no archaeological deposits. Its greatest contribution may have been flexibility. Cook one food, warm another. Dry materials, discourage animals, create light, extend conversation, transform a temporary resting place into something resembling a social center. No single benefit thing. That pattern should sound familiar. By now, Homo erectus repeatedly succeeds through combinations rather than miracles. Efficient bodies combine with memory. Stone tools combine with mobility. Social learning combines with environmental knowledge. Fire, when available, adds another layer. Outside, the skies become completely dark. The group settles closer as the final flames shrink. You can feel gentle heat on one side of your face and cool night air against the other. For perhaps the first time in this long journey, darkness no longer controls everything. And once food enters that circle of warmth, another part of Homo erectus survival begins to change. Section 11. The last embers glow beside you and the smell of smoke slowly mixes with something far more practical. Food. A strip of meat warms near the edge of the fire, darkening slightly as fat begins to soften. Nearby, several roots lie beneath warm ash, their skins blackened, while the inside becomes easier to chew. The evening sounds are quiet now. Insects hum beyond the firelight, wood cracks softly, and someone turns a piece of food with a sharpened stick. For Homo erectus, eating was not simply about finding enough calories. It was about flexibility. That flexibility may have been one of the greatest reasons these humans survived across such different environments for so long. A species tied too closely to one food source becomes vulnerable when climates shift, animals move, or familiar plants disappear. Homo erectus seems to have avoided that trap. You watch the group divide what they have collected. Some food came from animals, some came from plants. Other items may have included roots, tubers, seeds, fruits, nuts, insects, eggs, and whatever else could be gathered safely from the landscape. The exact proportions changed from place to place. There was no universal Homo erectus menu. One population living near a lake would encounter different foods from another living beside open grassland. A group in tropical Asia would face very different choices from one surviving in cooler Eurasian regions. That variety matters. You pick up a roasted root. Its surface is rough and warm against your fingers while steam escapes from a crack in the skin. The smell is earthy and faintly sweet. Cooking when available could make many foods softer. That would save chewing effort. It might also allow people with damaged or missing teeth to consume foods that would otherwise be difficult. You remember the toothless elder from Dmanisi. Perhaps food preparation helped individuals like that survive. Perhaps companions helped more directly. The evidence cannot settle every detail, but the possibility stays with you. Meat was also important. Animal bones from early archaeological sites often preserve cut marks made by stone tools. These marks show that early humans sometimes removed flesh from carcasses and broke bones to reach nutritious marrow. That is one of the clearer mainstream facts in this story. The more difficult question is how those carcasses were acquired. Did Homo erectus hunt regularly? Did they scavenge animals killed by large predators? Did they do both depending on opportunity? Researchers have argued about this for decades. You imagine approaching a recently dead antelope. The smell reaches you first. It is strong, warm, and mixed with dust. Flies gather quickly. A stone flake slices through hide more effectively than teeth ever could, opening access to muscle and other tissues. But the carcass is not necessarily yours. Hyenas may return. Big cats may still be nearby. Vultures overhead could reveal the location to competing scavengers. Getting food is one problem. Keeping it is another. A group offers an advantage. Several individuals can watch while others cut. Noise-thrown stones, sticks, or coordinated movement may help discourage smaller competitors. Against larger predators, caution remains wiser than bravery. Prehistoric confidence has limits. You move away from the carcass with food carried in both hands. Transport changes everything. Once meat or plant foods can be carried toward others, eating becomes social. Food no longer has to be consumed exactly where it is found. This may have encouraged sharing, delayed consumption, and perhaps more organized use of temporary gathering places. How much sharing occurred remains uncertain. Modern hunter-gatherer societies can provide useful comparisons, but Homo erectus lived in different social worlds and should not be treated as a simple copy of recent humans. Still, transport itself is visible indirectly. Stone tools, animal remains, and repeated activity areas suggest that food sometimes moved across short distances before consumption. You sit near the fire again. A child watches an adult crack open a long bone. The stone comes down sharply. The sound is dull at first, then suddenly hollow. Inside lies marrow, rich in fat and calories. Marrow is valuable because fat is energy-dense. That matters especially when lean meat alone may not provide enough dietary fat during certain seasons. Brains from animal skulls could offer another fatty resource. Accessing them requires effort. Early humans clearly learned that bones were not simply waste. This ability to extract hidden calories may have been especially useful during difficult periods. I begin to understand how knowledge turns scarcity into opportunity. A root hidden underground looks invisible unless someone remembers where its leaves once grew. A bone looks empty unless someone knows what is inside. A shell looks useless until it is cracked. Survival rewards curiosity. There is even a quirky debate about whether early humans occasionally consumed foods many modern people would find rather less elegant. Termites are one example. Some primates use sticks to extract insects, and termites are rich in protein and fat. Direct evidence for Homo erectus termite fishing is lacking, yet researchers have occasionally considered whether perishable wooden tools could have supported insect gathering and other behaviours that stone archaeology simply fails to preserve. It is possible. It is also frustratingly invisible. You picture one early human poking a stripped twig into a termite mound. Perhaps this happened, perhaps never. The termites predictably have filed no report. Plants likely contributed more heavily to the diet than old popular images of heroic prehistoric hunters suggested. Plant foods rarely preserve as clearly as butchered animal bones, which creates a strong archaeological bias. Seeds burn and survive sometimes. Pollen can preserve. Microscopic residues may remain on tools or teeth, but much of a plant meal disappears completely. This means prehistoric diets can look meatier than they really were. You walk the following morning through low vegetation. Dew touches your ankles. The air smells fresh, almost green after a cool night. Several people stop near a patch of broad leaves. They begin digging. Underground storage organs, such as roots and tubers, can provide carbohydrates when fruits are scarce. Some require processing. Others may contain irritants or toxins that must be reduced through soaking, pounding, heating, or careful selection. Learning which plants are safe is slow. One mistake can be costly. This is another reason social knowledge matters so much. You do not need to rediscover every edible plant personally. You watch, you remember, you copy. Over generations, a community can build a practical library without writing a single word. Which fruit is ripe? Which nut needs cracking? Which root becomes edible after heating? Which leaf should never be touched? The answers travel through behavior. Scholars still disagree about how dependent Homo erectus became on cooking during different periods. Some argue that regular cooking transformed energy intake early, while others think habitual cooking became widespread much later. That uncertainty leaves room for several lifestyles. Some meals may have been raw, others roasted. Some foods may have been dried by sun, others eaten immediately beside water or stone sources. There was probably no single rule. The group keeps moving because diet and mobility are connected. When one resource disappears, another can replace it. When herds leave, plants remain. When fruits fail, roots may still be found. When dry seasons reduce vegetation, animal foods may become more important. Flexibility provides insurance. Not perfect insurance, but enough. You begin noticing that this flexible diet also supports geographic expansion. A specialist entering a new region must locate familiar food. A generalist can experiment. That ability may help explain why Homo erectus could move into landscapes ranging from African grasslands to parts of temperate Eurasia and tropical Southeast Asia. Different environments ask different questions. Homo erectus often found workable answers. The afternoon grows warmer. You smell crushed grass underfoot and hear stones shifting as the group crosses a dry channel. One person carries gathered plants. Another carries meat. Someone else carries only stone. Each object represents a different part of survival. Tools open food. Memory locates food. Fire transforms food. Social relationships may distribute food. Movement finds the next source. Again, no single breakthrough dominates the storm. Success comes from combination. By evening, the group reaches another resting place. Food is divided quietly. Children sit close to adults while the first shadows stretch across the ground. There is nothing dramatic about the meal. That may be the point. For more than 1 million years, survival depended less on spectacular moments than on ordinary meals found shared, processed, and remembered. And around those meals, something else was growing. A social world. Section 12. The evening meal fades into darkness, and your attention shifts toward the youngest members of the group. A child sits close to an adult, turning a small stone between both hands while the others settle nearby. Firelight, if available tonight, flickers across faces and throws moving shadows against the ground. The air smells of smoke, damp earth, and food recently cooked or torn apart. Children are everywhere in human history, yet archaeology rarely notices them. Bones preserve some evidence of age growth, nutrition, and injury, but childhood behavior almost always disappears. A small handprint may survive by accident. A poorly made stone flake may suggest practice. Most lessons vanish completely. For Homo erectus, childhood was probably crucial because survival depended upon learning an enormous amount about the surrounding world. Which animals should you avoid? Which plants are edible? Where does water remain during drought? How do you recognize good stone? How close can you approach a carcass before danger outweighs hunger? These are not instincts alone. They are learned judgments. You watch the child imitate an adult striking 2 stones together. The first attempt produces nothing useful. The second sends a tiny fragment sideways. The third makes the adult glance over. Perhaps there is correction. Perhaps only observation. Researchers still debate how much deliberate teaching existed among early human populations because teaching itself leaves almost no physical trace. Some skills could spread through imitation while more difficult tasks may have benefited from active guidance. Stone knapping is one example. A beginner must understand force angle stone quality and the unpredictable consequences of each strike. Watching helps, but repeated practice matters. The child tries again. This time a small, sharp flake comes away. Nothing dramatic happens. No one applauds. Yet a useful skill may have just moved from one generation into another. That transfer is enormously important. A species can inherit anatomy through genes, but communities can inherit behavior much faster. If one generation discovers a better route, safer food, or more reliable tool-making method, the next may begin life with an advantage. Culture accumulates quietly, not always perfectly. Knowledge can also disappear. If a small population loses several skilled adults, a technique may vanish. If groups become isolated, local traditions may drift apart. This fragile transmission may help explain why prehistoric technology sometimes changes slowly and unevenly. A useful method survives only if somebody learns it. You move closer to the resting group. One child leans against an older adult. Another wanders toward the edge of the gathering place and is gently redirected. Young children would have created practical problems for highly mobile communities. They cannot travel as quickly. They tire easily. They require food protection and attention. A group moving across wide landscapes must therefore organize itself around more than strong adults. That requirement may have encouraged greater cooperation. Human children today develop slowly compared with many mammals, spending years dependent upon others. How closely Homo erectus matched modern human developmental patterns remains debated. Some evidence suggests growth was faster than in Homo sapiens, while other traits point toward an increasingly prolonged childhood compared with earlier hominins. The exact tempo is still uncertain. The famous Turkana boy sits at the center of this discussion. Researchers have long argued over his age at death and how rapidly his body was developing. Estimates have changed as scientists compare dental growth, skeletal maturity, and modern developmental patterns. Whatever the precise number, his skeleton suggests that Homo erectus' childhood was already becoming something distinctive. Longer development creates costs. Young individuals must be fed for longer. They require protection. They occupy adult attention. But longer development also creates time for learning. A complicated landscape becomes easier to survive if children can spend years observing how adults respond to it. You imagine a young person following an experienced forager. The adult stops near an ordinary-looking patch of ground. A digging stick enters the soil. A root appears. Later the child may remember the shape of the leaves, the moisture of the soil, and the season when the food is worth collecting. No classroom required, but the classroom is required. The landscape becomes the classroom. Every path contains information. You continue listening to the group. There may be vocal communication, though you cannot know how structured it is. Perhaps specific calls identify danger. Perhaps gestures coordinate movement. Perhaps language in some early form is beginning to carry increasingly detailed information. Scholars remain cautious because siege does not fossilize. Anatomy can provide hints, but language depends on brains, social interaction, learning, and behavior as much as throat structures. Even the simple communication would help children learn. A warning sound can prevent a dangerous approach. A gesture can direct attention. A repeated sequence can associate one sound with one object or action. Complexity can grow from ordinary exchanges. Then your attention turns toward another individual. An older adult moves slowly near the edge of the group. The gait is stiff. Perhaps an old injury affects one leg. This person would not match the ideal image of prehistoric survival as constant strength and ruthless competition. Yet fossil evidence sometimes suggests early humans survived significant injuries or physical limitations. At Demanis, you already encountered the nearly toothless elder. Other early human fossils also show healed trauma, chronic conditions, or bodily stress. Survival after injury does not automatically prove active caregiving. An individual may recover through personal resilience or access to softer foods. Still, some cases raise the possibility that social tolerance and assistance mattered. You watch another adult hand the older person a smaller portion of softened food. That exact scene is imagined. The broader possibility is not unreasonable. A group that shares food gains flexibility. A temporarily injured individual may survive long enough to recover. An elder who walks more slowly may still remember water sources or seasonal routes. Value is not limited to physical power. This becomes especially important in dangerous environments. An experienced adult may recognize animal behavior that younger members misread. A familiar smell can signal rain. A distant bird call can reveal water. A subtle track can warn that predators passed recently. Knowledge accumulates with age. Keeping knowledgeable individuals alive can benefit more than the individual. Whether Homo erectus communities understood this consciously is impossible to know. Evolution does not require philosophical explanations. Helpful behavior can spread simply because groups containing cooperative individuals survive more effectively under certain conditions. Cooperation also carries costs. Food given away cannot be eaten by the giver. Protecting a weak member can slow travel. Watching children reduces time available for foraging. Human social life has always involved negotiation between individual needs and group stability. Even prehistoric families probably had difficult days. A quirky possibility appears when you notice the children playing. Play behavior is widespread among mammals and especially common among intelligent social species. Young primates chase, wrestle, imitate adults, manipulate objects and rehearse behaviors without immediate practical purpose. Homo erectus children probably played too. There is almost no direct way to prove it, yet it would be surprising if they never did. You imagine two children tossing pebbles into shallow water. One tries to hit a floating branch. The other copies. Soon the activity becomes competitive. No archaeologist could identify this event later. The stones would simply remain stones. But play develops coordination, social boundaries, curiosity, and experimentation. Perhaps some technological innovation begins exactly this way. A child strikes the wrong material. A fragment behaves unexpectedly. Someone notices. Human creativity does not always begin with serious face. The night becomes quieter around you. A child has fallen asleep near an adult's side. Another older individual watches the dark beyond the gathering place. The smell of smoke lingers in clothing and hair while cooler air settles close to the ground. I begin understanding that Homo erectus survival cannot be reduced to legs, brains, or stone tools. Bodies move. Tools cut. But groups remember. Children learn. Adults cooperate. Older individuals may carry knowledge across decades. Every generation begins with fewer problems to solve alone if social information survives. That may be one of the deepest advantages in the entire Homo erectus story. A human does not survive only through what one body knows. A human can survive through what others know too. Morning will eventually arrive and the group will move again. Children will follow. Someone will carry food. Someone will remember the route. And together they will face the rain, cold predators, drought and uncertainty waiting beyond the next ridge. Section 13. Morning comes cold enough that your first breath feels sharper than expected. The ground beneath you is stiff with overnight chill, and pale mist hangs between scattered trees. Moisture beads along grass stems, wetting your ankles as you begin walking with the group. Somewhere beyond the ridge, an animal calls once, then the landscape settles into silence again. There is no shelter waiting ahead, no waterproof roof, no stored food hidden inside a permanent house, no woven blanket folded neatly beside a fire. For Homo erectus, survival depends upon carrying relatively little and knowing how to use almost everything around you. The world provides stonewood water plants, hides shade and danger in generous quantities. Comfort is temporary. Knowledge matters more. You follow the group toward a low rocky slope where sunlight begins reaching the ground. Several individuals stop in a protected hollow, perhaps because the stone blocks the morning wind. Even without building elaborate structures, choosing the right resting place can make an enormous difference. A shallow overhang stays drier. A south-facing slope may receive more sunlight. A grove reduces wind. Higher ground avoids sudden flooding. These choices seem small until you imagine making them every night for years. The cold is manageable today, but farther north conditions can become harsher. Homo erectus and closely related early human populations entered regions where temperatures dropped well below those familiar from tropical Africa. How they tolerated colder periods remains uncertain. Fire would certainly help when available. Animal skins may have provided insulation. Body size activity, seasonal movement, and carefully chosen shelters could also reduce exposure. Yet direct evidence for tailored clothing appears much later. This means early humans may have survived cool environments without anything resembling the fitted garments you would expect today. Perhaps hides were wrapped around shoulders, laid beneath sleeping bodies, or used as simple coverings. Perhaps some populations avoided the coldest seasons entirely. Researchers still disagree about how regularly early Homo erectus occupied truly cold environments rather than moving through them during warmer phases. The distinction matters. Surviving one mild season is not the same as enduring generations of winter. You continue downhill as the sun rises. The cold disappears quickly. By late morning, warmth spreads across your back and the landscape becomes dry enough that each footstep lifts fine dust. This rapid shift reminds you how much prehistoric survival depends upon adaptability rather than permanent solutions. The same individual may need shade at midday and warmth after sunset. A single landscape can punish you in opposite ways within hours. Then the clouds arrive. Dark layers gather almost silently across the horizon. Wind begins moving through the grass, bringing the smell of rain before the first drop falls. Birds become restless and distant thunder rolls through the valley. The group reacts quickly. They move toward higher ground. Rain begins with scattered heavy drops, then suddenly becomes a continuous curtain. Water runs down your face, soaks your skin, and turns dry soil into slippery mud. The sound becomes enormous. Rain strikes leaves stone earth and bodies until conversation, if there is any, becomes difficult to hear. In tropical and monsoon environments, storms like this could transform familiar ground within minutes. Dry channels become streams, rivers rise, paths disappear beneath mud. A resting place that seemed safe yesterday may become dangerous tonight. Again, behavioral flexibility matters. You do not need advanced technology to understand that floodwater leaves marks on trees. You need experience. You do not need writing to remember which slope remains dry. You need someone who survived the previous storm. This is the quiet power of repeated observation. The group reaches a rocky shelf before the worst water arrives. Everyone crowds beneath limited cover. Wet bodies press close together, while rainwater drips steadily from the edge above. The air smells strongly of mud, damp hide, and crushed vegetation. One child shivers. An adult pulls the child closer. No grand survival technique appears, only a useful decision. Weather is only one threat. By evening, the storm passes and another problem begins moving through the wet grass. Predators. Early Homo erectus shared landscapes with large cats, hyenas, crocodiles, and other dangerous animals that could easily kill an isolated individual. Some species were larger or more formidable than familiar predators today. A lone human would be vulnerable. A group is different. Several pairs of eyes can watch different directions. Sticks can be raised. Stones can be thrown. Noise can make a hesitant predator reconsider. Fire, when present, may add another protective layer. Still, no defense guarantees safety. You hear a low sound beyond the trees. Everyone becomes still. The reaction passes through the group before you understand what caused it. Heads turn together. One individual picks up a stone. Another draws the child inward. The darkness beyond the open ground suddenly feels closer. A large cat may be there, or nothing. The important point is readiness. Predator avoidance is partly physical, but much of it is behavioral. Recognizing tracks, scent alarm calls, and dangerous terrain can prevent confrontation before strength becomes relevant. This may have been more important than heroic fighting. Prehistoric humans probably survived predators mostly by not behaving foolishly around them. A surprisingly timeless strategy. The next challenge arrives more slowly. Drought. You feel it not in one dramatic moment, but through absence. A seasonal pool shrinks. Grass turns brittle. Animal herds become harder to find. Fruits disappear earlier than expected. The smell of the landscape changes from green and damp to dusty and sunbaked. Water becomes the center of every decision. Mobility now shows its true value. A population able to travel farther can abandon a failing patch before resources collapse completely. Memories of distant springs become precious. This is where older individuals may matter greatly. One experienced traveler recognizes a valley others barely remember. The group changes direction. You follow across dry ground for hours. Heat presses down from a cloudless sky and the horizon shimmers above pale soil. Your mouth feels dry while the air carries almost no scent except dust. The walking seems endless. Then birds appear. Their flight becomes lower. Vegetation thickens slightly. Someone quickens pace. Water is near. A narrow spring emerges between rocks hardly impressive by modern standards. Yet the first sound of a trickling water feels richer than any palace fountain. The group drinks. Children splash briefly. Hands wet faces. Life becomes possible again. This ability to move through scarcity may explain part of Homo erectus' longevity. A species dependent upon one narrow habitat would suffer when climate repeatedly rearranged Africa and Eurasia. Homo erectus endured through multiple glacial and interglacial cycles. Habitats expanded. Habitats contracted. Rainfall shifted. Animal communities changed. Populations moved, adapted, fragmented, and sometimes vanished locally. The species continued. There is a quirky possibility that some early humans used substances around them in ways archaeology barely detects. Mud plant fibers, bark leaves, or animal fat could have helped protect skin from insects, sun, or cold. No convincing evidence proves routine use by Homo erectus. Still, simple experiments require little technological sophistication. A wet hide blocks wind better than bare skin until it becomes unpleasantly cold. Dry grass can form bedding. Leaves can provide temporary cover. Ash can discourage some insects. Many useful behaviors leave almost nothing after a few seasons. This creates a distorted archaeological picture. Stone tools survive magnificently. A clever arrangement of grass does not. So when you picture Homo erectus with only stone in hand, you may be seeing preservation rather than reality. The group rests near the spring as evening approaches. Someone gathers branches. There's branches. Another checks the surrounding slope. A child sits on dry grass instead of bare ground. Perhaps that choice is accidental. Perhaps learned. Either way, comfort improves slightly. That is how survival often works. Not through one revolutionary invention, but through hundreds of small adjustments repeated until they become habit. Move when water fails. Rest where wind is weaker. Watch the animals. Protect the young. Remember the route. Use what the landscape offers. As darkness returns, the air cools again and yesterday's heat already feels distant. You smell dried grass, damp stone near the spring and faint smoke beginning to rise. Homo erectus does not conquer this world. They negotiate with it. Again and again, and over hundreds of thousands of years, that quiet adaptability proves more durable than almost any comfort technology could provide. Section 14. The spring behind you disappears as another enormous stretch of time begins opening across the landscape. You are no longer following one group through one season. Instead, you are watching entire environments transform around countless generations of Homo erectus. Forests expand then retreat. Lakes deepen then vanish. Grasslands spread across valleys that once held wetter woodland. The changes are slow from day to day. Across thousands of years, they become immense. Morning arrives beneath a cool grey sky, and the air carries the damp smell of soil after rain. Grass bends under beads of water, while mist lies low across a shallow basin. The world feels generous today. Water is everywhere. Animals gather near the lake. Edible plants grow thickly along the margins. For a human group living here, this may seem like a landscape worth remembering. Then time accelerates. Rainfall weakens. The lake edge withdraws. Mud becomes cracked earth. Vegetation thins and familiar herds begin moving toward other valleys. Nothing has gone wrong in a single afternoon. The world has simply changed. Homo erectus survived through repeated shifts like these across an astonishing span of time. During the Pleistocene, global climates oscillated between warmer and colder conditions while regional rainfall patterns changed repeatedly. These cycles altered habitats across Africa and Eurasia. Ice sheets expanded far to the north. Sea levels fell. Dry regions widened. Later warmer conditions returned, ice retreated, and coastlines moved again. The geography experienced by one generation might look noticeably different from that known by distant descendants. That creates a challenge no stone hand axe can solve alone. You can sharpen a blade. You cannot sharpen the weather. The most useful response is flexibility. When grassland expands, people can follow grazing animals into open country. When woodland returns, plant foods and smaller animals may become more important. When water disappears, mobility becomes essential. When rivers flood, higher ground becomes safer. This repeated adjustment may have been one of the central reasons Homo erectus lasted so long. Researchers sometimes describe early humans as ecological generalists, meaning they could use a broad range of resource sources, rather than depending on one narrow habitat. That description fits the pattern well, but even here the details are complicated. Different Homo erectus populations may have specialized locally, while the species as a whole remained flexible. A group living beside a lake for generations could develop habits very different from another, surviving on open plains. Local expertise and broad adaptability can exist together. You walk through one such changing landscape. The ground is dry now and wind pushes dust across your ankles. Thorny shrubs replace wetter vegetation while a distant herd moves toward a shrinking water source. One traveler stops and examines the horizon. Perhaps the decision to leave has already been made. There is no dramatic meeting, no speech. The group simply begins moving earlier each morning and resting farther from the old camp. Eventually, they do not return. This kind of movement may have happened countless times. Some populations shifted only a few kilometers. Others gradually expanded across entire regions. Still others became isolated when deserts widened, rivers changed direction, or coastlines broke apart. Isolation matters because a small population is vulnerable. Disease can strike, food can fail, birth rates can fall. One unlucky sequence of seasons may erase a local community completely. Extinction does not always require catastrophe. Sometimes there are simply fewer children. That quiet reality is easy to overlook when discussing species that survive for more than 1 million years. Homo erectus endured as a lineage, but individual populations probably appeared and disappeared repeatedly. Success was uneven. The larger pattern persisted because other groups survived elsewhere. You can think of the species as a scattered network of small flames. One goes out. Another continues. A third moves into new territory. Later descendants spread again. The survival of Homo erectus may therefore have depended less on permanent stability than on repeated recovery. That is a very different kind of strength. It is not invulnerability. It is resilience. The landscape changes once more. Now the air is cooler and wind moves sharply across open ground. Clouds gather above distant hills while your breath almost seems visible in the morning chill. Animals carry thicker coats. The vegetation has changed. Humans must adjust again. Perhaps they remain only during mild seasons. Perhaps fire becomes more important. Perhaps hides are used more often. Perhaps movement shifts toward lower valleys during winter. The archaeological record rarely preserves enough detail to tell you exactly how these adaptations worked. Paleoanthropologists continue to disagree about how far early Homo erectus routinely penetrated into truly cold environments. Some sites suggest impressive tolerance, while others may represent warmer climatic windows rather than year-round occupation. That distinction changes how you picture their lives. A population living permanently through cold winters needs different solutions from one visiting during favorable months. Seasonal movement could solve many problems. Modern migratory animals use this strategy constantly. Humans can do the same, especially when they understand where resources return each year. Migration does not always mean leaving forever. Sometimes it means knowing when to come back. You follow a familiar valley through several imagined seasons. Spring brings fresh shoots. Summer concentrates animals near water. Autumn changes plant foods. Winter reduces activity and makes every calorie more valuable. The group responds differently differently each time. A child growing up within this cycle does not learn one landscape. The child learns several versions of the same landscape. That knowledge may be more important than any individual tool. A stone hand axe cuts today. Seasonal memory tells you where food will be next month. The second kind of knowledge is invisible after death, yet it can shape survival for generations. Climate variability also influenced the animals living beside Homo erectus. Some species expanded their ranges, others retreated. New competitors appeared. Old prey disappeared. Predators changed to a hunting or scavenging strategy successful for thousands of years could suddenly become less useful when animal communities shifted. This forces experimentation. New prey requires new timing. Different carcasses require different processing. Unfamiliar plants must be tested cautiously. A flexible species survives partly by tolerating imperfect solutions. That may sound unimpressive. It is actually powerful. Evolutionary success often belongs not to the organism with the perfect answer, but to the one capable of finding several adequate answers. Homo erectus seems unusually good at this. There is also a curious technological lesson hidden inside these climatic cycles. Acheulean hand axes remain recognizable across vast periods even while environments around their makers change dramatically. For years, this long technological stability was sometimes treated as evidence of limited innovation. But stability can mean something else. Perhaps the tool remained common because it kept working. A versatile cutting implement useful across changing environments does not need fashionable updates every few generations. Its durability as an idea may itself signal success. Of course, technology was probably broader than stone alone. Wooden digging sticks, carrying devices, plant containers, bedding, hides and other organic materials may have varied far more than the surviving archaeological record suggests. Those objects disappeared. Stone stayed behind and took all the credit. You continue walking as the scene shifts again. The dry plain becomes a wetter valley. Trees return. Birdsong grows louder. The smell of damp leaves replaces dust. Human generations have passed without your noticing. A group now follows a stream toward a place their ancestors may never have known. Perhaps another population lived here before them. Perhaps it vanished during the previous dry phase. Now humans have returned. This cycle of occupation, abandonment, and recolonization may have happened repeatedly across the Homo erectus world. The species does not need every location to remain continuously inhabited. It only needs enough populations to survive somewhere. That geographic spread becomes insurance. A drought devastating one region may spare another. A volcanic eruption destroying one valley leaves distant populations untouched. Climate works unevenly. So does survival. This may help explain why a widespread species can persist longer than one restricted to a narrow area. By evening, the valley is calm. Water moves gently over stones and insects begin filling the air with a steady background hum. Cool moisture settles against your skin. You look across the stream and imagine the same place 10,000 years earlier. Different plants, different animals, perhaps no humans at all. Then 10,000 years later, another population. Another set of children learning where water gathers. Homo erectus survived not because the world remained kind. The world kept changing. That was the point. For well over 1 million years, these humans repeatedly adjusted to landscapes that refused to stay familiar. They moved, learned, lost territory, gained new ground, and endured through environmental changes larger than any single lifetime could understand. Their greatest adaptation may therefore have been adaptation itself, and as populations became scattered across continents, those long-separated communities began looking increasingly different from one another. Section 15. The valley around you remains familiar, but the people crossing it no longer look exactly like those you first met in Africa. Time has stretched outward with geography. Some Homo erectus populations now live thousands of kilometers apart, separated by mountains, deserts, rivers, forests, and changing coastlines. Generations pass without distant groups ever meeting, while bodies slowly respond to different histories and local conditions. The morning air feels cooler here. Wind moves through dry grass with a soft brushing sound, carrying the smell of dust and stone from an exposed ridge nearby. A small group crosses the slope below you, their silhouettes dark against pale sunlight. You recognize them immediately, but differences are appearing. Their skulls are not identical to those discovered farther west. Faces vary. Brain case shapes vary. Bone thickness varies. Even body size can differ greatly between populations assigned to Homo erectus. This creates one of the most persistent puzzles in early human evolution. What exactly is Homo erectus? The question sounds simple until you place fossils from Africa, Georgia, China, Indonesia, and other regions side by side. Some resemble one another strongly, others differ enough that researchers have spent decades arguing over whether they belong within one species. The fossils refuse to vote. You move closer to an imagined reconstruction. The individual before you has a long, low skull rather than the rounded brain case of Homo sapiens. Heavy brow ridges extend above the eyes while the face projects more strongly than yours. There is no modern chin. The bones of the skull appear robust. These broad traits are commonly associated with Homo erectus, especially in Asian specimens. Yet details change from place to place. Some Javan fossils appear especially robust. Chinese specimens have their own patterns. Early African fossils sometimes seem more lightly built. Dimensai adds even greater variation. This is where classification becomes difficult. Some researchers use Homo erectus broadly, including early African forms within the same species. Others prefer calling many African fossils Homo ergaster, reserving Homo erectus more narrowly for Asian populations. Neither choice is purely cosmetic. Names influence the story you tell. If African and Asian fossils belong to one species, Homo erectus becomes an extraordinarily widespread and variable human lineage. If they represent several species, then early human evolution involved multiple closely related forms expanding and adapting separately. Researchers remain divided over where those boundaries should be drawn. The difficulty begins with the meaning of species itself. With living animals, scientists can sometimes observe whether populations interbreed successfully. Fossils do not offer that luxury. You cannot place two skulls together and politely ask what happened. Instead, researchers compare anatomy. They measure brow ridges, cranial capacity, jaw shape, dental features, bone thickness, and dozens of smaller characteristics. Then they estimate how much difference is acceptable within one species. Modern humans provided an important warning. People living today vary considerably in height, facial structure, body shape, and other anatomical traits. If future researchers discovered only a handful of isolated modern skeletons, they might overestimate how many species existed. Demonicide demonstrated this problem vividly. Several skulls from one location showed surprisingly large anatomical variation despite likely belonging to one population living within a relatively narrow period. You remember Skull 5. Its combination of a small brain, case, large face, and powerful jaw looked dramatically different from some nearby individuals. That discovery encouraged arguments that early Homo may have been more variable than previously assumed. Perhaps some fossils, given separate species names, actually belong within one broad, diverse lineage. Perhaps. Other researchers remain unconvinced. Geographic differences accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years cannot automatically be explained by a variation within one local population. Separate evolutionary histories may still justify separate names. The debate continues quietly behind museum labels. You walk eastward in imagination. The landscape becomes warmer and more humid. A river moves slowly between dense patches of vegetation, and the air smells of wet leaves and rich sediment. Somewhere in these environments, Javan Homo erectus develops characteristics distinctive enough that experienced researchers can often recognize the regional pattern. Isolation may help explain this. During periods of lower sea level western Indonesian islands connected with mainland Southeast Asia through Sunderland, During higher sea levels, populations could become more isolated. A corridor opens, then closes, humans spread, then remain separated. Repeated cycles like these could produce regional differences without creating completely separate species immediately. Geography becomes an evolutionary experiment. Farther north and east, other populations occupy different seasonal environments. They encounter colder winters, different prey, different stone resources, and perhaps different population densities. Over many generations, local adaptations and genetic drift can gradually change appearance. Not every difference needs to be useful. Some simply become common by chance in small populations. This is especially important because Homo erectus communities were probably never enormous. Small populations exaggerate randomness. A trait carried by a few successful families can become widespread locally, even without providing a major survival advantage. You can therefore imagine the Homo erectus world as a patchwork. Each region develops its own accent. Not necessarily in speech, though, perhaps that too. An anatomical accent, a technological accent, a dietary accent, a behavioral accent. The basic human form remains recognizable, but local traditions and bodies slowly diverge. One quirky detail comes from the thickness of some Homo erectus skull bones. Older interpretations occasionally encouraged rather dramatic ideas about why the skull was so robust, including suggestions that heavy cranial bones reflected frequent violent blows. That explanation is not considered sufficient today. Skull thickness more likely reflects complex developmental, structural, and evolutionary factors rather than Homo erectus spending every afternoon hitting one another over the head. Prehistory has enough difficulties already. Still, robust anatomy remains noticeable. The brow ridge may help distribute mechanical stresses across the face and skull, though its exact evolutionary significance is still discussed. It may also partly result from how facial and cranial structures grow together. There is rarely one perfect explanation. You kneel beside an imagined fossil bed. Only part of a skull emerges from sediment. Immediately you understand the problem researchers face. A single fragment must sometimes carry enormous interpretive weight. Was this individual male or female, young or old, typical or unusual, local or recently arrived? Without a larger sample, variation becomes difficult to judge. Sexual dimorphism adds another complication. If males and females differed substantially in size or robustness, two fossils from one species could appear deceptively different. Age changes bone as well, especially around muscle attachment sites and teeth. Then there is time. Two fossils found in the same broad region may still be separated by hundreds of thousands of years. That is enough time for substantial evolutionary change. Calling both Homo erectus may be useful, but it can also hide how much transformation occurred within the lineage. The name begins to function like a very large umbrella. Under it stand people from different continents, climates, and periods. Some lived before others were even born as populations. You stand beneath that umbrella now, it feels crowded. Yet there is something beautiful in the uncertainty. Human evolution was not a procession of perfectly separated species taking turns on a stage. Populations overlapped, divided, moved, changed, and perhaps sometimes met relatives carrying slightly different histories. The boundaries were probably blurry even then. Nature rarely pauses to label transitions. Yes. One population becomes more distinct gradually. Another disappears. A third exchanges genes with neighbors. Whether this happened often among Homo erectus groups remains uncertain, because recoverable ancient DNA from such deep tropical contexts is exceptionally difficult to obtain. Without genetic evidence, anatomy must carry most of the argument. New protein techniques may eventually help clarify some relationships, but much remains unresolved. For now, the faces remain silent. Evening settles across the river. Warm air carries the smell of mud and vegetation, while insects gather in the fading light. Several humans move along the opposite bank, their bodies reflected briefly in dark water. They are Homo erectus, or perhaps Homo augusta, or perhaps members of a broader family we've divided too neatly. Whatever name you choose, they share an extraordinary inheritance. They walk upright across continents. They learn local landscapes. They shape tools. They endure. And while regional differences continue accumulating, these populations are no longer alone in the human world. Other human lineages are beginning to appear around them. Soon the family becomes crowded. Section 60. The riverbank darkens behind you, and the human world begins to feel more crowded than before. For hundreds of thousands of years, Homo erectus populations have spread across vast regions of Africa and Eurasia. Some remain isolated for long periods, while others occupy territories that shift as climate and geography change around them. Then new human forms begin appearing, not all at once, not everywhere, and certainly not in a tidy sequence. You walk through a cool valley where evening mist settles above a slow river. The air smells of wet stone, moss, and distant smoke while branches click softly in the wind. Somewhere beyond the trees, another group of humans is moving through the same landscape. They may not be Homo erectus. That possibility changes everything. Human evolution was never a simple relay race in which one species vanished before another entered the world. Different human populations overlapped in time, sometimes across neighboring regions, creating a prehistoric world inhabited by multiple kinds of humans. Some lineages eventually gave rise to Neanderthals. Others contributed to Denisovans. Still others remain known only through fragmentary fossils or genetic traces detected in much later populations. Homo sapiens will eventually join this crowded family. But not yet. For now, you are watching populations diverge. A group becomes separated by mountains. Another survives through colder climates farther north. A third adapts to tropical regions where humidity, vegetation, and disease create different pressures. Over enough generation separation changes bodies. Faces shift. Brains change in shape and size. Tool traditions may diverge. Behavior follows local needs. This branching process is slow enough. Nobody living through it would notice species forming. One generation resembles the previous one almost completely. Then another follows. Thousands of generations later, the descendants on opposite sides of a continent may look surprisingly different. You continue along the river. Across the water, several figures appear briefly between trees. Their bodies seem familiar, yet something about their proportions is different. Perhaps they belong to another early human population. You cannot know. The archaeological record rarely provides scenes where two human species can be shown meeting face to face with certainty. Still, overlap makes encounters possible. And that raises one of the most fascinating questions in prehistoric anthropology. What happened when different humans met? Did they avoid one another, compete, share territory, exchange tools, fight occasionally, interbreed? The answer may have differed every time. Later genetic evidence proves that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. That discovery permanently changed the old image of human species as completely separate biological islands. For Homo erectus, direct genetic evidence is far harder to obtain. DNA survives poorly across immense spans of time, especially in warm environments where chemical decay works quickly. As a result, scientists cannot simply sequence most Homo erectus fossils and map every relationship. Historians of human evolution still argue over how much interbreeding may have occurred between deeply divergent populations before Homo sapiens appeared. Some encounters may have produced descendants. Others may have involved populations already too separated genetically or behaviorally for frequent mixing. Much remains uncertain. You imagine two groups discovering the same water source. One approaches from higher ground. The other arrives along the river. For several moments, neither moves closer. The air is cool. Water splashes quietly against stones. Children remain behind adults. A stone tool is visible in one hand. Perhaps both groups recognize one another as human-like. Perhaps that recognition carries no comfort at all. Competition is the obvious possibility. Water is limited. Food is limited. Useful stone may be limited. Two populations occupying the same ecological niche could place pressure on one another simply by using the same resources. No dramatic battle is required. If one group reaches a carcass first, the other eats less. If one population occupies the safest shelter, another remains exposed. If prey numbers fall, even modest competition becomes dangerous. Ecology can create conflict without hatred. Yet competition need not mean constant violence. Groups might pass through the same region during different seasons. One could specialize more heavily in certain foods. Another could exploit different terrain. Temporary avoidance may reduce direct encounters almost completely. Human populations can live surprisingly close while rarely meeting. Geography helps maintain that separation. A ridge is enough. A desert is better. A glacier is extremely persuasive. Climate repeatedly created and removed barriers across Eurasia. During colder periods, ice and dry steppe could divide populations. During warmer periods, forests or newly accessible corridors might reconnect them. The human family expands and contracts with the landscape. You see this most clearly as the valley changes around you. Trees disappear. Open grass spreads. Large herbivores move through in greater numbers. Then centuries later, wetter conditions return and woodland closes over routes that once felt effortless. Each shift changes which groups can meet. Solution creates difference. Contact can reduce it. This tension between separation and reconnection may have shaped much of later human evolution. A particularly intriguing example comes from Eastern Eurasia. Denisovans are known largely through genetic evidence and a relatively small number of fossil remains, yet their DNA reveals a widespread and complicated history. They interbred with ancestors of some modern populations. Their story shows how enormous lineages can remain almost archaeologically invisible. That should make you cautious when imagining the world of Homo erectus. There may have been human populations we have not recognized at all. One tooth can change the picture. One fragment of bone can open an entire branch. Prehistory is crowded with missing relatives. You walk farther into the valley as sunlight weakens. A group is working beside an exposed stone source. Their technique resembles one you have seen before, but not exactly. Different traditions could emerge even without major anatomical differences. Stone technology is learned socially. If groups become isolated, small habits may persist locally for generations. One population favors one reduction sequence, another prefers another. Raw material also pushes technology in different directions. This creates a problem for archaeologists. A different tool tradition does not automatically mean a different species, and similar tools do not automatically prove close biological relationship. People can copy useful ideas or invent similar solutions independently. A sharp edge is useful almost everywhere. The same logic applies to fire hunting strategies and shelter. Behavior crosses boundaries differently from genes. That makes encounters potentially important even when interbreeding does not occur. Imagine one group observing another from a distance. They notice a method for working stone. Perhaps they imitate it later. No conversation is necessary. A technique can travel simply because somebody watches. Did such cultural exchange happen between early human populations? Researchers cannot prove many specific cases, but the possibility becomes increasingly plausible as different lineages overlap geographically. There is also the question of disease. When previously separated populations meet, pathogens may travel with them. Modern history offers many dramatic examples, but you should be careful projecting those patterns directly into deep prehistory. Population densities were much lower. Long-distance chains of transmission were harder to maintain. Still, parasites and infections could move between groups during repeated contact. Even small health effects matter in fragile populations. Another pressure comes from demographics at size. A lineage with more individuals can recover from local losses more easily. Small groups are vulnerable to accidents, poor birth rates, and environmental shocks. If one human population consistently maintains larger social networks, it may eventually expand into regions occupied by smaller groups. Again, no conquest is required. Numbers alone can reshape territory over generations. This may become extremely important much later when Homo sapiens spreads widely. But Homo erectus itself had already demonstrated the value of broad geographic distribution. Its populations were scattered across enormous regions. One valley could fail while another survived. That resilience helped the lineage persist while neighboring human forms rose and disappeared. You pass beside the river as darkness settles. Across the water, the other group has vanished. You never learned who they were. That feels appropriate. Most prehistoric encounters left no record. Two groups may have shared a valley for a season and vanished without leaving evidence distinguishable thousands of centuries later. Yet those meetings mattered to the people involved. A stranger could mean competition, a new partner, a source of information, a threat, perhaps curiosity. The human family was becoming a network of overlapping populations rather than a single line marching toward you. That network would grow more complicated before it became simpler. Homo erectus had already survived astonishingly long while relatives appeared around it. Now the question becomes unavoidable. What allowed this particular human form to endure when so many others did not? Section 17. The river beside you grows quieter, and the scattered human figures from the previous evening disappear into darkness. What remains is a larger question. Why did Homo erectus last so long? You have already seen pieces of the answer scattered across Africa, Georgia, China, and Java. None of them looks dramatic enough to explain survival across such an immense span of time. There is no single invention, no perfect weapon, no sudden leap toward modern intelligence. Instead, you find something less glamorous and perhaps more useful: flexibility. Morning arrives across an open plain where cool air carries the smell of dry grass and distant water. Gravel shifts softly beneath your feet as a group begins walking toward low hills. They do what Homo erectus has always done well. They move. Efficient walking may have been one of their greatest advantages. Long legs, terrestrial body proportions, and strong endurance allowed populations to travel between food patches, water sources, and seasonal habitats. When one place deteriorated, movement offered another option. That sounds almost obvious. It was enormously powerful. A species trapped within a narrow habitat can disappear when climate changes beyond its tolerance. Homo erectus occupied a far wider ecological range and eventually spread across much of the Old World. Geographic range acts like insurance. A drought in one region does not destroy populations living thousands of kilometers away. A volcanic eruption may devastate one valley while another remains untouched. Local extinction becomes less likely to mean total extinction. You climb the hill with the travelers. From the top, several habitats are visible at once. Grassland opens toward the west. Trees follow a river eastward. Rocky ridges rise beyond them. Each area offers different resources. Homo erectus did not need every habitat to be perfect. They needed enough options. Diet provided another layer of protection. You have watched these humans process animal foods, collect plants, crack bones, dig roots, and exploit whatever their surroundings offered. That flexibility mattered when the seasons changed. Meat could become important during one period. Plant foods could dominate another. Aquatic resources might supplement diets near lakes and rivers. Researchers still disagree about exactly how broad Homo erectus diets were in every region because plant foods preserve much less clearly than animal bones. The archaeological record is selective. Dinner is especially bad at fossilizing. Still, the patterns across sites suggest these humans were not locked into one narrow feeding strategy. A generalist can survive imperfect conditions more easily than a specialist. Tools strengthened that advantage. Stone flakes opened hides. Hand axes cut and chopped. Hammer stones cracked bones. Wooden implements, if commonly used, would have expanded the toolkit further, even though most disappeared without trace. You pick up a simple flake beside the path. It weighs almost nothing. Your knowledge of how to create that edge can travel across landscapes without requiring anyone to carry the original tool. This may be one of Homo erectus's quietest strengths. They could manufacture useful technology locally. A traveler who understands stone fracture is not dependent upon one inherited object. Find workable material, strike it correctly, and another sharp edge appears. Knowledge is lighter than equipment. The same principle applies to landscapes. A spring does not need to be physically carried. A location can be remembered. A dangerous ravine becomes avoidable once someone has survived it. Seasonal fruiting becomes predictable after repeated observation. This social memory turns experience into survival. You notice an older traveler pause beside a narrow animal trail. The others stop too. Perhaps the elder recognizes something subtle. A track, a scent, a change in vegetation. The group chooses another direction. You cannot know whether such scenes happened exactly this way, but long-term survival in variable environments almost certainly depended upon accumulated ecological knowledge. Brains matter here. Yet raw brain size alone is not enough. A larger brain that fails to preserve useful information offers little advantage. Social learning allows one individual's experience to benefit others. Children watch adults. Novices copy tool-making. Younger travelers learn which animals become dangerous near water. Knowledge survives the person who first discovered it. That gives culture an evolutionary role. Not culture in the form of tepals or written stories. Culture as repeated behavior. A tool-making habit. A route. A food processing method. A warning gesture. These small traditions can stabilize life through changing conditions. Fire may have contributed too, although its importance probably varied through time and region. Where controlled flame became dependable, humans gained warmth, light cooking, predator deterrence, and a social center after sunset. Yet Homo erectus had already expanded far beyond Africa before clear evidence for habitual fire becomes widespread. That tells you something important. Fire helped. It did not create their entire success. The same is true of hunting. The same is true of hand axes. Homo erectus repeatedly avoids depending upon one miracle. The afternoon becomes warmer. Heat presses against your shoulders while insects buzz steadily among the dry plants. The group slows near shade and resumes walking when conditions improve. Another advantage may lie in precisely this ordinary pacing. Energy efficiency matters. Every calorie saved during routine travel is a calorie available for growth, reproduction, recovery, or the next difficult day. Evolution often rewards boring efficiency. That may be less exciting than a dramatic hunt, but survival does not care about television. Population structure probably mattered as well. Homo erectus communities were dispersed across enormous territories rather than concentrated in one vulnerable region. Different groups developed local traditions and anatomical differences. Some populations disappeared, others continued. Later surviving populations could expand into favorable areas again. You can imagine the lineage as a huge network of campfires separated by darkness. One flame fades, another remains, a third light somewhere farther away. As long as enough remain, the species continues. This distributed survival may help explain longevity better than any single adaptation. There is also a strangely revealing technological fact. Acheulean Handaxi traditions persisted for over 1,000,000 years. To modern eyes that can seem almost comically conservative, you might expect technology to change constantly. Homo erectus appears less interested in updates. But why replace something that works? A durable multi-purpose tool made from widely available material may remain useful through enormous environmental change. Technological stability can indicate success, not failure. The oddest object is sometimes the one nobody felt compelled to redesign. Still, Homo erectus was not frozen in time. Brain size generally increased across parts of the lineage. Original tool traditions changed. Populations adapted anatomically. Their environments transformed repeatedly. Success came from remaining recognizable while never remaining completely unchanged. That balance is difficult. Too little flexibility makes a species fragile. Too much specialization can become a trap. Homo erectus seems to have occupied a broad middle ground for an extraordinarily long time. Scholars continue to debate whether this longevity partly reflects taxonomy itself. If fossils currently grouped under Homo erectus actually represent several species, then the apparent duration of one species becomes shorter. That is a fair caution. But even divided more narrowly, the broader erectus-grade lineage remains remarkably persistent. You descend from the hill as evening approaches. The air cools quickly. Somebody carries stone. Another carries food. Children remain within the group. An older individual walks more slowly near the rear. Nothing in the scene looks revolutionary. That may be the answer. Homo erectus survives because success is repeatedly assembled from ordinary things. Walk efficiently, eat flexibly, learn locally, share information, use simple tools well, move when conditions fail, stay where conditions improve, adapt without needing perfection. The formula is almost disappointingly sensible, and it worked for an astonishing length of time, for generation after generation. Homo erectus continued while environments changed and other human lineages appeared around them. Yet even the most durable strategy has limits. The campfires ahead are becoming fewer. Soon the species that endured through so much change will begin its long disappearance. Section T. The campfires ahead are fewer now. You notice the change gradually the way you might notice stars disappearing before dawn. One valley still holds a small group, another remains empty, and farther east a familiar riverbank shows only old stone flakes beneath fresh sediment. Nothing announces extinction. There is no final trumpet, no last great battle. Instead, a population disappears here, then another somewhere beyond the mountains, while distant groups continue for thousands of years without knowing they are becoming rare. The morning feels unusually quiet. Cool mist hangs above a broad river, and wet grass brushes softly against your legs. The air smells of mud, decaying leaves, and mineral-rich water flowing slowly between dark banks. This is Java again, for an extraordinary length of time. Homo erectus populations survived on this island and the surrounding regions. Some of the youngest widely accepted fossils associated with the species come from Ngandong along the Solar River. Their age became one of paleoanthropology's longest-running puzzles. Early estimates varied dramatically because the fossils had been recovered decades before modern dating methods could be applied carefully. Later work placed the Ngandong remains roughly between 117,000 and 108,000 years ago. If those dates are correct, Homo erectus survived here remarkably late. By then their species had already existed for well over 1,000,000 years. You stand beside the ancient Solo River and imagine one of those final populations. Their people look familiar now. Low skulls, strong brow ridges, bodies shaped for walking, hands capable of producing tools from local stone. Their ancestors had crossed continents, endured climate shifts, and survived changing ecosystems that erased countless other lineages. Yet the environment around them is changing again. Grasslands shrink, woodland expands, animal communities alter. The river itself changes course. Java during the later Pleistocene was not a stable refuge preserved outside time. Climate and vegetation continued shifting while sea levels repeatedly transformed connections between islands and the Asian mainland. A habitat favorable for generations could disappear surprisingly quickly in geological terms. You follow the group away from the river. The ground becomes softer beneath thicker vegetation. Leaves block much of the sunlight and the air grows humid enough that your skin remains damp. This may have mattered. Some researchers have proposed that later, Javan Homo erectus populations were strongly associated with open woodland and grassland environments. As wetter, rainforest-like conditions expanded, familiar resources may have declined. The animals they depended upon could change as well. Large grazing species might retreat. Different forest-adapted animals could replace them. An adaptable lineage faces many challenges. but adaptability is never unlimited. A species successful in several environments does not automatically succeed in every environment. You hear monkeys calling somewhere high above. Birds answer from dense foliage. The forest feels alive, but not necessarily generous to these humans. Finding food in tropical woodland requires different knowledge from exploiting open river plains. Visibility decreases. Movement becomes slower. Familiar herd animals may become less common. New foods may exist everywhere, but knowing how to use them takes time. This is one possible explanation for decline. It is not the only one. Researchers still debate exactly why Homo erectus disappeared and whether different regional populations vanished for completely different reasons. That uncertainty is unavoidable. A species spread across enormous territory is unlikely to have one universal final cause. Climate may matter in Java. Population fragmentation may matter elsewhere. Competition with other humans could become important in some regions. Random demographic decline may finish with populations already weakened by environmental change. Extinction often comes through combinations. That pattern feels strangely appropriate for Homo erectus. Their success came through combinations too. Now their disappearance may work the same way. You walk farther beneath the trees. The group is small. Perhaps only a few families remain within this local population. Small numbers create dangers that no hand axe can solve. If several children fail to survive, the population shrinks. If adults die before, reproducing recovery becomes harder. If neighboring groups disappear, finding partners becomes more difficult. Genetic diversity can decline. Knowledge can vanish when skilled individuals are lost. No catastrophe is required. Mathematics can become deadly. A population may simply cross a threshold where ordinary bad luck becomes impossible to absorb. This demographic fragility is especially important in prehistoric humans whose population densities were often low compared with later societies. You imagine one winter with poor food, then another difficult season. An injury removes one experienced forager. A dangerous flood kills several people. A local group that had survived hundreds of generations may now contain too few individuals to continue. No fossil records the sadness. Only absence remains. There is also the question of newcomers. By the later Pleistocene, other human lineages were spreading and diversifying across Eurasia. Eventually, Homo sapiens would expand into regions where older populations had lived for astonishing spans of time. Did modern humans directly encounter the last Homo erectus populations? The timing remains uncertain. In Southeast Asia, some dates raise the possibility of relatively close chronological proximity, but there is no secure evidence of a dramatic face-to-face replacement at Gandong. You should resist imagining a prehistoric showdown. Reality may have been quieter. Homo erectus could already have been declining before Homo sapiens arrived nearby, or different human populations may have occupied separate regions and habitats for long periods. Competition, if it occurred, could involve food territory or population growth rather than direct violence. A larger social network can outcompete a smaller one without anyone understanding what is happening. More people mean more information, more mates, more opportunities to recover from local losses. Demography can become technology of a different kind. You stop beside a shallow pool. Several footprints press into the mud. Rain will erase them soon. That temporary quality fits the final Homo erectus story. For more than 1 million years, their presence seemed almost permanent. Then their traces become sparse. One quirky possibility occasionally appears in discussions of late survival. Could isolated Homo erectus populations have endured even later in remote Southeast Asian regions? Stories sometimes grow around this possibility, especially when people connect Homo erectus with later mysterious hominin traditions or local legends. There is no reliable evidence supporting modern survival. The idea belongs more to speculation than science. Still, the attraction is understandable. A species that lasted so long feels difficult to imagine truly ending. You want one hidden valley, one forgotten island, one final group still walking beyond the archaeological horizon. But evidence must remain the guide, and the evidence eventually becomes silent. The afternoon turns golden near the river. A few individuals gather near exposed stones. One strikes a core and removes a sharp flake. The sound is familiar. You have heard it beside African streams, Caucasian valleys, and Asian riverbanks. Strike. Pause. Turn. Strike again. A technological rhythm older than countless later civilizations continues for one more evening. A child watches closely. Perhaps the child will learn. Perhaps that knowledge will survive another generation. You cannot know. The sadness of extinction comes partly from this uncertainty. The final population does not know it is final. Nobody says we are the last Homo erectus. They wake hungry. They search for food. They protect children. They remember water. They worry about rain. Life remains ordinary until it stops continuing. That may be the most human part of the ending. The species does not fail because it was foolish. It does not disappear because evolution judged it inferior. It had already survived environmental upheavals beyond anything one individual could comprehend, but survival has no permanent guarantee. A strategy can succeed for 1,000,000 years and still meet conditions it cannot overcome. As evening darkens, the river reflects a narrow strip of fading light. Insects gather over the water. The smell of damp earth deepens. Across the bank, several figures move between trees. Then vegetation closes behind them. For the first time in your journey, you do not follow. You simply listen. Their footsteps fade. The species that crossed continents, endured climates, and outlasted countless neighbors is approaching the end of its long road. And with that disappearance comes one final question. If endurance eventually ends for everyone, what does it truly mean to call one human species successful? Section 19. The footsteps have disappeared, but the question they leave behind feels larger than the species itself. What does success mean? You stand beside the quiet river while the last light fades across the water. The air smells of damp soil and reeds, and somewhere in the darkness a nightbird calls once from the trees. Nothing in this landscape offers a definition, so you have to choose one. If success means surviving for the longest time, Homo erectus makes an extraordinary case. Depending on how broadly the species is defined, populations associated with Homo erectus persisted for well over 1,000,000 years. Homo sapiens, by comparison, has existed for only a fraction of that span. That alone should make you pause. Modern humans are accustomed to thinking of themselves as the inevitable winners of human evolution. You have cities, satellites, medicine, agriculture, libraries, spacecraft, and an impressive talent for placing passwords on things, and then forgetting them. By technological standards, there is no contest. Homo sapiens dominates, but evolution is not an engineering competition. A species does not earn success by building the most complicated objects. It succeeds by surviving long enough to reproduce, adapt, spread, and continue through changing conditions. By that measure, Homo erectus performed remarkably well. You walk away from the river and imagine a map slowly unfolding beneath your feet. Africa appears first, then the Caucasus. Western and Eastern Asia follow. Farther south and East Java emerges from a shifting Pleistocene coastline. Across this enormous territory, populations associated with Homo erectus lived under very different environmental conditions. That geographic range matters. Few earlier human species had spread so widely. A lineage established across several regions is less vulnerable to one local disaster. Drought can destroy one population while another survives hundreds of kilometers away. Volcanoes can bury one valley. Floods can erase another. The species continues elsewhere. Homo sapiens eventually pushed this geographic strategy much farther, spreading to nearly every major terrestrial environment and crossing substantial stretches of open water. But Homo erectus had already demonstrated the basic power of expansion long before your species appeared. It was humanity's first great traveler. That is one measure of success. Another is ecological flexibility. You remember African grasslands beneath hard sunlight. You remember the cool valleys around Manisi. You remember humid Java river corridors changing, woodland, seasonal dry country, and landscapes reshaped repeatedly by climate. Homo erectus did not thrive in every environment equally. No species does, yet they tolerated an impressive range of conditions while maintaining populations across deep time. That adaptability may be more impressive than one spectacular invention. Consider the hand axe again. It seems almost modest compared with later bows, needles, boats, or metal blades. Yet a versatile stone tool persisted across vast periods because it worked. The same may be true of Homo erectus itself. Not perfectly adapted to one narrow world, good enough for many worlds. That can be a powerful evolutionary strategy. You stop beside a patch of exposed gravel and pick up an imagined hand axe. The stone feels heavy and cool in your palm. Its edges are worn slightly from use. Someone shaped this object using knowledge passed through generations, perhaps within a tradition that had already existed longer than many entire later civilizations would survive. Technological stability can look primitive only when viewed from a culture obsessed with novelty. From an evolutionary perspective, stability may reflect reliability. If a solution works, keeping it is sensible. This raises an awkward question about Homo sapiens. Are you more successful because your technology changes rapidly, or merely more complicated? The answer depends on what happens next. Your species has existed for roughly 300,000 years. A remarkable span by ordinary historical standards, but relatively brief beside Homo erectus. You do not yet know how long Homo sapiens will last. That fact is strangely difficult to feel because you live inside the experiment. There is no final score. Not yet. If Homo sapiens survives another 1,000,000 years, perhaps the comparison will look very different. If not, Homo erectus may remain one of the longest-lasting human lineages ever known. Scholars still debate how fair this comparison actually is. Part of the problem is taxonomy. If Homo erectus includes several regionally distinct populations that some researchers would separate into different species, then its apparent longevity may be partly created by classification. A broader label naturally covers more time. Homo sapiens is also not directly comparable in every way because modern humans developed under different ecological, technological, and demographic conditions. So the contest itself is artificial. Evolution never held one. Still, comparisons can reveal assumptions. Calling Homo sapiens the most successful human species often hides the criteria being used. If you mean cultural complexity, yes. If you mean global population size, unquestionably. If you mean technological power, obviously. If you mean environmental modification, the evidence surrounds you everywhere. But longevity, the answer becomes less comfortable. Homo erectus may win for now. There is another measure. Continuity. Across countless generations, Homo erectus populations maintained enough successful reproduction to preserve a recognizable lineage through repeated environmental change. Think about what that actually requires. Every generation must somehow raise enough children. Those children must learn enough about food danger tools, movement, and social life to survive. They must eventually reproduce. Then the process repeats, not for centuries, for hundreds of thousands of years. The scale is almost impossible to imagine. A quirky way to feel it is to compare Homo erectus with familiar written history. The pyramids of Egypt are only several thousand years old. Rome's imperial period occupies a tiny fragment of time. The entire span from the earliest farming villages to your modern world would fit many times inside the lifetime of Homo erectus as a lineage. Kingdoms arise. Languages appear and disappear. Homo erectus simply keeps all walking. That simplicity is humbling. Yet success has another side. Homo sapiens achieved something Homo erectus apparently never did at comparable scale. Your species developed immense social networks connecting strangers across distance. Symbolic language became extraordinarily complex. Art, ritual, long-distance exchange, specialized technology, and eventually agriculture transformed human life. Population density increased. Knowledge accumulated faster. Cultural change accelerated. This gave Homo sapiens enormous adaptive power. Instead of waiting for biological evolution, humans could invent clothing shelters, boats, weapons, storage systems, and social institutions within generations. That is a different survival strategy. Homo erectus adapted slowly through a mixture of biology and durable cultural traditions. Homo sapiens increasingly adapts through culture at extraordinary speed. Speed is powerful. It can also create new risks. The same intelligence that produces medicine can produce destructive weapons. The same agriculture that feeds millions can damage landscapes. The same dense networks that share information can spread disease rapidly. No species is received benefit without costs. You walk farther beneath a clear night sky. The ground feels cool beneath your feet and dry grass brushes softly against your legs. You imagine Homo erectus surviving without knowing anything about extinction statistics or evolutionary success. They did not need the concept. Their daily measure was smaller. Water found, food gathered, children protected, a storm survived, a route remembered, tomorrow reached. Perhaps that is the most honest definition of success in deep time, not dominance. Continuation. Modern humans often measure success through expansion, production, wealth, or control. Evolution measures nothing consciously. It simply reveals which lineages remain. Homo erectus remained for an extraordinary length of time. That achievement deserves respect even if the species eventually vanished. And disappearance does not erase success. Dinosaurs dominated terrestrial ecosystems for far longer than humans have existed, yet extinction does not make them evolutionary failures. The same applies here. Every species eventually faces changing conditions. Longevity is not immortality. You look toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond it, Homo sapiens is coming. Your species will inherit landscapes once crossed by Homo erectus and other human relatives. You will develop technologies they could never imagine. You will occupy diverse tundra islands, mountains, and eventually environments far beyond Earth itself. But the clock is still running. That changes the comparison. Perhaps Homo sapiens will become the most enduring human species ever. Perhaps not. The future has not voted. For now, Homo erectus stands as a reminder that sophistication and success are not always the same thing. A simple toolkit can accompany a durable species. A modest brain can belong to an extraordinary traveler. A lineage without writing can survive longer than entire worlds of written history. The night air becomes softer as you continue forward. Ahead, the long story is almost complete. Only one final view remains, not of extinction, not of competition, but of what these enduring humans left behind for every later member of the human family. Section 20. The night sky opens wider above you, and the long trail of Homo erectus finally stretches behind you. For a moment, you can almost see the entire journey at once. There are African grasslands glowing beneath afternoon sunlight, river valleys cutting through unfamiliar country, cool Georgian hills, broad Asian plains, and humid forests beside the ancient Solo River. Across all of them, small human figures continue walking. No monuments mark their passage. No inscription preserve their names. No ruler orders their achievements carved into stone. Yet they endure. You walk slowly across an open plain while pale moonlight settles over dry grass. A mild breeze touches your face, carrying the familiar smell of dust leaves and cooling earth. Somewhere nearby, water moves quietly through a shallow channel. The sound feels almost unchanged from the rivers you followed earlier. That continuity matters. Homo erectus lived in a world without civilization, yet the basic problems of being human were already recognizable. You become hungry. You seek food. You become cold. You search for shelter. A child becomes tired. The group slows. Someone remembers where water lies beyond the next ridge. Another person knows which stone breaks cleanly. Human life is already becoming a shared project. That may be one of the most important things Homo erectus left behind. Not a particular hand axe, not one migration route, not even one anatomical feature. They helped establish a pattern of human survival built around mobility, learning, cooperation, and adaptation. Later humans inherited and expanded that pattern. You did too. When you look at your own body, you are seeing part of this ancient story. Your long legs, efficient, upright stride, remarkable ability to sweat, dexterous hands, and dependence upon social learning all developed through evolutionary histories stretching far beyond Homo sapiens. Homo erectus did not create every one of those traits. Some began earlier, others continued changing later. But within Homo erectus, many characteristics came together in a form recognizably closer to the human body you carry now. That is why their silhouettes seemed familiar from the beginning. You return in imagination to Turkana. He walks ahead beneath a hot African sky, his long legs carrying him steadily over exposed ground. He cannot know that more than 1,000,000 years later, another kind of human will study his bones and wonder about his childhood. I is simply walking home. Perhaps that is enough. Farther north, the Dmanisi elder sits near companions despite having lost nearly all usable teeth. The healed jaw remains one of those rare clues suggesting that survival may sometimes have depended upon more than individual strength. Exactly how that person ate remains uncertain. Perhaps naturally soft foods were sufficient. Perhaps food preparation helped. Perhaps companions shared and processed food. Researchers still argue over how confidently such fossils can be interpreted as evidence of care. You will never hear the answer, but you can appreciate the question. Humanity may have been learning very early that a group sometimes survives by supporting members who cannot temporarily or permanently do everything alone. You continue walking. A stone knocks against another beside the river. The sound takes you back through nearly every landscape you crossed. Strike. Turn. Inspect. Strike again. Acheulean tools persisted for more than 1,000,000 years, an almost absurd duration when compared with modern technology. Entire modern industries can become outdated before someone finishes paying for the device they bought last year. The Homo erectus approach was calmer. If it worked apparently, there was no urgent need for version 2.0. That longevity once looked like technological stagnation to some researchers. Yet you can view it differently after this journey. A reliable idea can be a successful idea. The hand axe did not need to become complicated to prove intelligence. Its maker had already selected material-controlled fracture, predicted shape, corrected mistakes, and perhaps learned the method from another person. The intelligence lies partly in the process. Then there is fire. You remember the uncertain embers inside ancient caves. Historians of human evolution still debate exactly when controlled fire became regular, and how often Homo erectus populations depended upon it. Strong evidence becomes clearer at some later early human sites, while claims from older contexts remain carefully examined. Perhaps some groups carried embers, perhaps others depended heavily upon natural flames. Perhaps knowledge of fire disappeared and returned. Cultural evolution does not always climb smoothly. That uncertainty makes the image more interesting. You imagine someone watching a dying ember on a rainy evening. Keeping it alive may require patience. Dry grass must be protected. Wood must be gathered. Someone has to notice when the glow weakens. that ordinary attention could eventually transform the night. Fire brings warmth. Cooking expands possibilities. Light extends social time. Predators remain farther from camp. Smoke discourages insects, although it also enthusiastically enters every available pair of eyes. Some prehistoric experiences were probably timeless. Above all, Homo erectus left a lesson about endurance. The species survived. Repeated changes in rainfall temperature, coastlines, vegetation and animal communities. Populations disappeared locally, but others continued elsewhere. Africa changed. Eurasia changed. Java changed. Homo erectus changed too. That final point is easy to forget. A species surviving for such immense time cannot remain biologically frozen. Brain size varied and generally increased in several populations. Regional skull differences accumulated, tool traditions diversified. The name Homo erectus covers movement as much as stability. Perhaps this is why arguments about classification never quite disappear. Was African Homo ergaster really separate? How much variation can one species contain? Did some late Asian populations deserve their own classifications? Paleoanthropologists continue debating those boundaries because nature rarely provides crisp transitions. The ancient humans themselves would find the discussion rather strange. They did not belong to scientific categories. They belonged to groups, to places, to families, to mornings when food was scarce and afternoons when rain finally arrived. You reach the edge of a shallow lake. Moonlight trembles on the surface and frogs call from dark vegetation around the shore. The ground feels cool and slightly damp beneath your feet. Across the water, another Homo erectus group appears. An adult crouches near the edge. A child stands close behind. Someone farther aback carries a stone tool. No one looks heroic. They look busy. That may be the image worth keeping. The most successful survival strategies are often ordinary enough to become invisible. Walk farther when the valley dries. Eat different foods when familiar ones disappear. Copy a useful technique. Remember the spring. Watch the children. Stay close when predators approach. Repeat tomorrow. Do this for generations. Then repeat it for hundreds of thousands of years. Eventually, a species without cities or writing becomes one of the longest-lasting members of the human family. Whether Homo erectus deserves the literal title of most successful human species ever depends upon your definition of success. Scientists do not rank species through one accepted measurement, and the taxonomy itself remains debated. Homo sapiens has achieved unmatched geographic reach, population size, cultural complexity, and technological power, but longevity tells another story. Your species is still young. Homo erectus had already endured several times longer than Homo sapiens has existed so far. So perhaps tonight's title is not a verdict. It is a challenge to stop imagining evolution as a staircase with modern humans standing proudly on top. There was no staircase. There were branches. Some flourished briefly, some crossed continents, some met and mixed, some vanished. One particular branch kept going for an extraordinary length of time, and for nearly 2 million years of human evolution, depending on how you draw its boundaries, Homo erectus became one of the most persistent presences on Earth. You look across the lake again. The figures are gone. Only moonlight remains. Their species disappeared, yet not everything belonging to their world vanished with them. The habit of travelling survived. The dependence upon knowledge survived. The importance of social learning survived. The ability to reshape stone-use landscapes intelligently and adapt behavior faster than anatomy could change continued through later humans. Eventually, those traits reached you, not as a simple inheritance from one species to another, because human evolution was far more tangled than that, but as part of an ancient human legacy. You have been walking through it all night. Word count 1. The landscape can grow quieter now. You no longer need to follow the travelers beyond another ridge. Let them continue without you beneath that enormous prehistoric sky, their footsteps becoming softer with every moment. The river keeps moving. Grass bends gently beneath the night breeze. Somewhere far across the plain, a small fire glows beside sleeping figures barely brighter than the stars above it. You can imagine an adult placing another branch onto the embers. A child sleeps nearby. Someone older rests close to the warmth. Beyond the circle of light, animals move through darkness exactly as they have for countless evenings. Nothing important needs to happen. Tomorrow will bring water to find food, to gather stone to shape another path beneath tired feet. But tomorrow is not your concern tonight. You can leave those ancient humans there, surrounded by the world they understood far better than you ever could. Their names are gone. Their languages, if they possess them, are silent. Their memories vanished with the people who carried them. Still, their long endurance remains written faintly in bone stone ash and the geography of human expansion. You do not need to decide whether they truly defeated Homo sapiens in some imaginary evolutionary contest. Perhaps success was never a contest at all. Perhaps it was simply waking beneath another sunrise, then another, and another, for generation after generation, for longer than kingdoms, longer than civilizations, longer than almost anything human memory can easily hold. The fire becomes smaller now, the river grows distant, the footsteps finally disappear, and under the quiet stars, Homo erectus continues walking somewhere beyond the edge of your imagination, carrying almost nothing except knowledge, companionship, and enough resilience to meet another day.